The palace courtyard is bathed in spring sunshine. The stately Hyzen proposes to Ruby, shyly offering her a ring, and she, stunned, accepts his declaration. Believing that fate has altered the canon of her favorite novel, Ruby remembers being reborn into the world of the novel, The Chronicles of Heroes of Light, becoming a nameless princess, while Hyzen is a hero of light destined for another ideal Maria. The realization of her own inferiority makes the proposal seem like an impossible miracle. Ruby is convinced the plot has gone off the rails, and for the first time allows herself to dream of happiness with the one who is destined to save the continent. In the palace, maids are combing the hair of the third princess, Azastar, a dazzling beauty of unknown origins. Excluded from the succession, she lives a life of luxury, but in the shadow of a cold emperor and alien brothers. At the age of 5, her memories of her past life as an artist returned. Having learned the world of the novel, Ruby decided to enjoy the peace of a rich princess and quietly love Hazen without interfering with the predetermined plot. After the engagement, the hero became even busier, and Ruby wandered the corridors, yearning. A chance encounter with a scarlet-eyed stranger upended her thoughts and sowed a disturbing curiosity. The stranger passes by without a bow, leaving an elegant pendant with a heart-shaped stone on the floor. Ruby picks it up, sensing that the encounter was no accident and that it conceals a threat. A system window flashes before her eyes, revealing the maid's affection level, 999. Ruby is startled, realizing she's seeing the hidden mechanics of the world, as if she's become a player in her own story. At tea with the cold Sister Elizabeth and the hostile Sylvia, the same figures emerge, 999. Behind the mask of barbs hides an inexplicable maximum sympathy for Ruby. The heroine decides to use her Onmis, reincarnated by status, to subtly strengthen her connections, as the system hints at hidden power. However, the strangeness of absolute numbers haunts her. The rumors revolve around the name of Prince Ancelot of Reinhardt, a young assassin with a frightening beauty. Rumors about him are intertwined with the image of a stranger with scarlet eyes. Ruby notices a pattern. The levels are visible only for women, while men remain hidden. The world seems upside down, and the usual rules of the romantic game are distorted. Comparing what she saw, she realizes that she is much more popular among the nobility than she thought. Her secondary role is crumbling, giving way to a center of attraction. In the evening, Ruby decides to visit Hazen alone, without her retinue, wanting to test her own feelings and make sure that their engagement is not an illusion of a changed plot. On the way to the main palace, she hesitates, fearing the suddenness of the visit. The silence of the corridors thickens, as if foreshadowing the revelation of a hidden truth. A new window pops up in the mirror. Her own level is 999. Self-attachment is reflected as a systemic value, and for the first time, Ruby doubts the nature of these numbers. The idea of universal, ultimate love is frightening. If all feelings are pushed to their limits, where is the place for sincerity and freedom of choice in a world controlled by an invisible interface? Approaching the garden, the girl notices Hazen pinning an unknown girl to a tree. The image shatters her confidence and brings back the fear of the canonical denouement. Jealousy and rationality clash in her chest. Perhaps the plot is still going the same way, and she is just a temporary error in the system, doomed to give way to the true heroine. With the pendant in her hand and a trembling heart, Ruby realizes she is at the center of a hidden game where love, power, and betrayal are intertwined under the guise of a perfect romance. Ruby freezes when she sees Hazen with a stranger in the garden. A window flashes above her, revealing options for kissing and sleeping, and the princess realizes this isn't a romance, but a twisted game version of the world. Memory of the fan nickname Shitty Chronicles emerges with bitterness. A game based on The Chronicles of Heroes of Light was criticized for its harem mechanics and attachment system, which distorted the heroes. The realization hits harder than the blow. She has been reborn not as an epic about salvation, but as a dating sim, where Hyzen is not the chosen one of the light, but a character who collects women for points. Hazen assures the stranger that his engagement to Ruby is a political move and that his true feelings are for her. The go shmush option flashes above the stage. To the bedroom, as a sentence to her illusions. Unable to bear it any longer, Ruby bursts onto the scene and sends the groom flying with a powerful punch, causing the system to sound an alarm about an emergency and a loss of affection. Red warnings demand she calm down or face penalties. Hazen falls to her knees, shaking, desperately trying to justify herself by playing the innocent victim. A new window reports the failure of the attempt to eliminate Ruby and recommends escape. The fear in Hazen's eyes betrays not the hero of light, but a player caught behind the scenes. Ruby grabs him before he can escape and throws him out in a rage, tearing the scene apart so that the scream echoes through the palace alleys. 3 days later, she lies in her chambers, turning over the pain in silence. Her feelings were sincere, but for him, everything turned out to be just a branch of the script. The maid, Sarah, gently touches her hair, and the number 999 shines above her head again. Devotion is absolute, but now Ruby doubts the nature of these numbers. Sister Elizabeth's sharp words and Sylvia's cold remarks come to mind. Their hidden, extreme sympathy takes on a different, awkward meaning. The puzzle suddenly comes together. If all women have 999 for her, perhaps the system perceives her differently than she thought, and this makes what happened even more humiliating. Ruby pounds her fists on the bed in frustration, ashamed of her own outburst. She's a princess, but she's acted like a character who's failed a quest. Sarah leaves the room in confusion, not understanding her hostess's outburst. Ruby is left alone with the thought that Hazen used his escape skill like a player. If he's a player, then the system windows are only accessible to him. Why does she see them too? As if violating the boundaries between NPC and user. Her gaze falls on the ruby heart pendant she found after her encounter with the mysterious man. It was then that the interface first came to life before her eyes. Approaching the mirror, Ruby feels a connection between the jewelry and her new abilities, as if the artifact has made her a participant in the game, not a puppet. Meanwhile, in the office, the same stately stranger discovers that the pendant is missing and furiously goes through the papers, trying to remember where he lost the jewel. He suspects theft and clutches his temples, realizing the value of the lost item. The ruby heart was the key, and now it is in the wrong hands. The threads of fate are pulled taut. A princess with access to the system and a man who has lost the artifact are moving towards an inevitable meeting where the game will cease to be a joke. Ruby clutches the emerald pendant, feeling the cool metal in her palm, and notices that her system plate glows with a soft pink light. Pressing a hidden button, she carefully opens the Lover attribute with a life countdown of 30 days and 80 hours, and her heart skips a beat as she realizes that the timer has started counting down not as a joke, but out of mortal necessity. Panic grows, as if an icy wind had struck the soul. The condition for the hero's awakening is the death of his beloved. For Hazen to reach the holy light, Ruby must die, and suddenly the engagement turns out not to be a sign of love, but a sentence dictated by a strict system, where every step is controlled by a mysterious algorithm. She realizes she's never played this version, but she understands that waking up completes the mandatory tutorial and triggers the game's main scenario. If her death is part of the tutorial, then fear and despair merge into a heavy knot in her chest that weighs on her every breath and thought. Tears mingle with rage, her pulse quickens. Ruby desperately tries to sever the lover-sea connection, but the system instantly informs her. As long as the imperial edict of betrothal is in effect, her relationship will not be annulled. Even the cry of the soul is powerless here, and every decision is strictly limited by the rules of virtual power. A break is only possible if there is a compelling political reason for the court. Mere treason is not enough. A high-level scandal or a breach of the title's terms is required, capable of shaking the court to its foundations and proving that the princess cannot be a plaything for the ambitions of a commoner. Calculation and cold logic emerge. Hazen is a commoner who seeks a noble title and the rights of affection granted by marriage to a princess. The engagement was a step toward ascendancy, and feelings are of little consequence here, as the system pushes each participant toward strategic behavior. A new window warns of the consequences. If Ruby calls off the engagement, Hazen will lose his honor, charm, and vast wealth, and the system will push him to increase her affection to stop the breakup. It's like invisible shackles limiting her freedom, and forcing her to think of every little thing as a trap. Anger gives way to cold clarity, and her mind fills with strategy. He came not out of love, but to preserve his own interests. Ruby decides to forego the meeting with him and demands solitude to gather her thoughts, assess the threat, and understand how to maintain her own will within the imposed rules. She recalls her past life, her experiences, and her lost dreams. Her aunt, her desperate studies, her admission to university, her sudden death under the wheels of a drunk driver, her shattered hope for the future, books and the inspiration that once sustained her emerge, and now it seems as if all of this collides with the harsh reality of her new life. The novel, The Chronicles of Heroes of Light, was once her support and comfort in difficult times. She believed that reincarnation would bring happiness and freedom, not the role of a victim for someone else's quest. And now this realization weighs on her heart, turning her emotions into a mixture of pain and determination to fight. The realization of the world's cruelty grips her heart like iron claws. The plot is designed for one player, and everyone else is expendable, including her, and every mistake or delay can cost her life, making Ruby feel like the game's space is becoming a cage where every possibility is limited by the system. Footsteps sound in the hallway, and for a second, Ruby thinks it's Sarah, but a different figure appears behind her, confident, menacing, and full of hidden power. Every step sounds like a warning, and the air around her trembles with hidden danger, making her heart beat faster. The man touches her shoulder and quietly declares that he has found what he lost. There is no pity or request in his gaze, only a demand to return what is his. The cold confidence in his voice and the slight tremor of magic create the feeling that she has encountered someone who can rewrite her destiny. A purple aura of magic thickens around him, vibrating in the air and causing the space to tremble. He gestures to the pendant with the ruby heart, as if the artifact itself is coming to life, obeying the will of its owner. And Ruby understands that her future decisions will test not only her mind, but also her willpower. Ruby realizes this is the same stranger who lost the artifact that first gave her a glimpse of the system and her own countdown. The connection between the pendant and her pink plaque becomes clear, as if a web of invisible threads stretches between them, tying the girl's life and freedom to someone else's power. Fear gives way to calculation, cold and clear. If the artifact is the key to the interface, returning it unconditionally means becoming a pawn once again, deprived of choice, with every action tracked by the system, preventing mistakes and making each step more important than the last. The man warns her of the consequences. She has touched something that doesn't belong to her. His voice doesn't sound like a request, but rather like a claim of ownership and a hidden threat that can't be dismissed. And Ruby understands that her decision affects not only her freedom, but also the potential safety of the other players. Ruby clutches the pendant tighter, feeling her lifespan ticking. Now she faces a choice: submit to the system and return the pendant, seek an alliance with its dangerous owner, or rewrite the rules of the game and risk everything for her own control over her destiny. Beneath a purple glow and a pink sign above her head, her destiny branches out, as if 1,000 paths were exploding before her eyes, breaking off an engagement, cheating the system, or rewriting the very script of awakening. Every step carries risk, excitement, and responsibility that she must navigate to preserve her life and freedom. Ruby screams out a misunderstanding, her voice breaking and her heart pounding with terror and the frenzied flow of magic. The scarlet-eyed man is already releasing his power, and the explosion throws her back, the tree behind her bursting into blinding flames, crumbling into ash, as if nature itself were reacting to danger and chaos. He calls her a thief, his eyes blazing with hatred, and demands the pendant. Ruby, trembling, tears off the cold fear and declares her status as Princess Azest, but in response, she hears a cold threat to cover up her murder. And the words sound like a sentence, deafening both mind and heart. The ground cracks beneath his steps, the air presses with force, as if reality itself were compressing. Ruby, remembering the countdown to her life, desperately thrusts the amulet forward, ready to face the end, feeling every second like a bitter blow of time pounding in her chest. The pendant flares, engulfing her in a bright light and unfurling a protective magical shell. Magic fills the space, dampening the man's attacks, and he freezes, breaking into a demanding whisper, trying to understand where the strength came from that could withstand his fury. A system window appears above the scene, warning of the guest's intervention and the growing affection, as if the game itself were registering the significance of the moment. Ruby realizes that events are once again intertwined with the interface's rules, and her actions are becoming critical to the outcome. The stranger suddenly softens, runs his hand over her head as if testing the limits of trust, and quietly asks if she can see the books, hidden windows accessible only to select players, awakening in Ruby a sense of power and control over a world that had seemed merciless. Meanwhile, Hazen, in pain from his knocked-out teeth, rages at the sheer realism of the situation, vowing revenge on Ruby as soon as he regains his smile. His emotions boil, but laughter and panic intersect with despair, creating a chaotic whirlwind of thoughts and actions. He soon reappears before the palace, but notices another man standing next to Ruby, Prince Ancelot of Ruinheart, dazzling, with perfect posture and equipment superior to his own. Hazen realizes he is giving up his place at center stage, and it strikes his pride. The indicator above Ruby's head drops into negative territory, as if the system itself were hinting at a shift in the balance of power. Hazen feels a loss of control, the realization that he is no longer the center of what is happening, and it makes his heart tremble with disappointment and anger. Ruby coldly warns that the next meeting will end more painfully, and her voice is devoid of its former sweetness, giving way to a determination ready for any outcome. Her gaze is firm, and her movements are measured, as if she herself is beginning to rewrite the script of the game and her own destiny. Emergence. Overhead, hinting at a bad ending, the interface intrudes frighteningly into reality, as if observing every step and nudging you toward critical choices where a mistake could cost you not only your loss, but your life. Hazen activates his acceleration skill and retreats in panic, thinking of something urgent to do. His flight only confirms the player's cowardice, manifested in a fear of losing control. Ruby watches this with cold clarity, realizing that she now dictates the rules. Ancelot watches with interest, as if testing Ruby's limits and capabilities. He assesses her composure and intelligence, and she remembers that it was he who lost the pendant that gave her access to the system. And now he is a key ally or tool in her hands. The prince touches her head gently and hugs her without causing harm. His touch has a controlled force, confident and calm, unlike the furious outbursts before, and for the first time Ruby feels trust in a man capable of being an equal partner in this game. Ancelot points to the pendant's ruby heart and calmly asks if she wants it. There's no threat in his voice, only a businesslike interest and calm curiosity that simultaneously reassures and forces her to evaluate her own capabilities, leaving room for independent choice. Ruby realizes the amulet is the key to her survival and to breaking her cursed engagement. Without it, she will once again become a pawn in a game where other people's rules determine destinies. And now she has a chance to regain control, rewrite the script, and survive this deadly process. Ancelot offers a deal, allowing him to remain by her side in exchange for tacit recognition of her right to the pendant. The offer feels like an alliance rather than a subjugation, and Ruby realizes that accepting it is strategically advantageous if she wants to maintain her independence. His purple aura flickers, but it no longer oppresses him as it once did. He sees her not as an NPC, but as an equal, capable of reading the hidden lines of the world. And this realization strengthens Ruby's trust, allowing her for the first time to feel not like a pawn, but an active participant in events. Ruby feels that an alliance with him could rewrite the script of awakening, disrupt the condition of her death, and change the course of the game. Her heart beats faster, her mind is cold, and every thought is aimed at maintaining control and safety of her own life. As the wind rustles and the interface fades, she realizes the game has changed, and now she has a figure capable of challenging the player. With this new ally, her chances of surviving and rewriting her destiny increase, and tension and fear are replaced by a cold determination to act. Ancelot asks to remain by her side during her stay in Azister. He introduces himself majestically as the Prince of Ruinheart, bending over Ruby's hand with a dangerous, almost playful courtesy, his gaze sparkling with curiosity and hidden strength. as if testing the limits of her power and control over the situation. Ruby recalls rumors of a blood prince whose brides died under mysterious circumstances. The idea of love at first sight now sounds ominous after the recent attack, when magic and threats literally tore the world apart, and her heart fills with a cold determination not to succumb to illusions. She clutches the ruby heart. The scarlet light had once already saved her from Ancelot's magic, and now the pendant becomes not just an amulet, but a key to system windows, her survival, and the ability to rewrite the course of events, as if fate itself is tied to this ruby core of energy. The strangeness intensifies. No signs appear above Ancelot. The interface seems to ignore his presence. He stares directly into the system and sees its strings. What is he if not a player or a special variable? His every move seems both calculated and unpredictable. Sarah enters the chamber, shaking with guilt and fear. It turns out that 3 years ago, Hazen used her to get close to Ruby, carefully laying the groundwork for a profitable engagement and manipulating their feelings like a chessboard, where every pawn could prove fatal. Sarah swears that after the engagement, she stepped back and no longer interferes. And Ruby forgives, admitting that they were both pawns in someone else's game. But she notices the handmaid's affection meter dropping and realizes that she can manipulate that number herself by altering the emotional connections in the system. The numbers melt from 930 to 899 and below. The system reacts to her coldness and determination, as if the subconscious mechanics of the world itself are taking her decisions into account. Ruby understands that she has the power to alter feelings and the course of events, turning her actions into a strategic maneuver against Hazen. The solution crystallizes in a clear picture. Destroy Hazen's harem, reset his affection points, and force him to leave the stage. Breaking the engagement will be a blow to his build and strategic influence, demonstrating that power and love are two different but connected games. A week passes, and a series of balls for her mother's birthday begins. Ruby has only 6 days left until midnight, and the potential trigger for awakening, when events could spiral out of control. And every step of the celebration will decide her life and the fate of the other players, like a chess game on the brink of chaos. Her image glows in the mirror, her reflection shimmering with a soft light, and the lifespan continues to tick, a reminder of the death countdown. She enters the hall to applause, greeting Hazen with an icy smile and a vow to dismantle his empire piece by piece, showing the entire palace that she now writes the rules of the game. Under cover of night, something sinister is happening in the palace. The silence of the long corridors is broken by strange, almost ominous traces of violence, and in one of the halls, Ancelot calmly observes the consequences of his own cruelty, as if he were studying the phenomenon, rather than feeling the pain or fear of the victims. The Prince of Ruinheart, Ancelot, holds a fragile cup of a rare blue drink in his hand, calling it a tea available only in the existing reality. And his every movement is honed, like a maestro controlling a symphony of power and fear at the same time. Among the defeated servants, he maintains serenity and cold interest, as if what is happening is just an experiment, a test of the boundaries of what is permitted, and the palace itself is turning into a laboratory for analyzing human reactions and the system of rules of subordination. His attention is drawn to the thought of Ruby, a girl who does not fit into the laws of the system, whose existence breaks out of the algorithm, like a random variable capable of disrupting the established order and bringing unpredictable consequences. Ruby Allister was once almost his target, but the amulet destroyed his intention and changed the balance of power. Now he sees her not as a victim, but as an opportunity, the key to fulfilling desires tied to the very structure of the world, where reality and play are intertwined. At another estate, celebrations for Ruby's mother's birthday are underway. The light of the opulent hall contrasts with the palace's nighttime darkness, creating an illusion of tranquility, while every glance and gesture becomes part of an invisible chess game of influence. Hazel carefully tries to regain the princess's favor, acting softly and relying on publicity as protection. His every move is calculated, as if he were playing a strategy game in which emotions and social connections are key resources. Ruby notices system windows popping up as Hazel approaches. Quests and the status of those around her are intertwined within the interface, revealing hidden parameters and secret abilities she can use to manipulate the situation. She discovers that she can see detailed characteristics of those around her if she focuses on their tablets long enough. Health levels, magical abilities, hidden information about the past, turning her into a nearly all-seeing observer of events. Experiments on the handmaiden reveal health parameters, magic, and hidden information about the character's past and role. Every emotion and fear is recorded by the system, allowing Ruby to anticipate actions and construct complex scenarios of influence. Hazel's artifact, Miriam's ring, reveals ideal types and views on love, facilitating manipulation. Ruby realizes that with access to this data, she can adjust emotional connections and control desires like a conductor. Using this knowledge, Ruby gradually weakens the affection of the girls who comprise his harem. Her cold calculation intertwines with an outward smile, making every action a subtle play of power hidden beneath a mask of benevolence. One's guilt, another's disappointment, and a third's disgust become its tools. Every emotion is recorded by the system, and its influence on attachment indicators becomes a means of strategic control and manipulation. The system registers a drop in stats, signaling an irreversible decline in affection, and the interface winks, acknowledging its effectiveness. Ruby feels an almost divine understanding of the mechanics, where emotions become a resource and numbers a weapon. At the ball, she plays the role of a benevolent bride, hiding a cold calculation behind a smile. Dancing, bows, and conversations become the course of a game, where every step is an opportunity to test her opponent and strengthen her own influence. The sweet cake becomes a symbol of her plan, a test for Hazel, and a probe of his fears. Even the most innocuous details of the celebration become tools for testing the limits of his control and his readiness for the unexpected. He suspects a trick, relying on the items in his inventory and his own foresight. Hazel notices vague signs, but realizes too late that he himself is a pawn in a game where Ruby controls the parameters and the course of events. Meanwhile, Ancelot appears at the doors of the hall, demanding entry, and the guards freeze before the approaching storm. The purple glow of the prince's aura is palpable even from a distance, and the presence of his energy changes the dynamic of the entire scene, creating a tension that is impossible to ignore. Hazel takes a bite of the cake and is suddenly overcome with panic. His throat feels like it's being squeezed by an invisible hand. His breathing becomes ragged, his knees buckle, and he falls to the floor, convinced that he has been poisoned in front of the whole world, turning the festive evening into a tragedy of his own imagination. He demands an antidote, his voice breaking into a hysterical whisper, but no one rushes to him. The servants and guests merely exchange confused glances, and within a moment it becomes clear that this is merely fear, inflated to the point of catastrophe, and that physically he is perfectly fine. Ruby maintains a perfectly composed demeanor, as if the whole thing were a minor awkwardness, and hands him a glass of champagne with a polite smile, watching as he eagerly seizes on the opportunity to reassure himself of her innocence and regain the last of his composure. Taking a sip, he begins to beam with relief and forced gratitude. But suddenly, the false teeth fall off his jaw, falling to the floor with a dull sound and revealing an emptiness that can no longer be hidden by either charisma or feigned confidence. The crowd falls silent, then erupts in rising whispers. Awkwardness quickly turns to humiliation, and the girls who had recently looked at him with interest turn away in visible disgust, shattering his carefully crafted image. The system flashes red notifications right before Ruby's eyes. Hazel's charm plummets, his title changes to a mocking one, and his affection stats collapse one after another, like a house of cards destroyed by a single, precise move. Ruby recalls with amusement how she'd previously examined his purchase history through the interface and discovered information about black market prosthetics. It seemed like a small detail, but it became the thread that could be pulled to unravel his entire reputation. In the Alistair Empire, the slime of rare snails is used to bond prosthetics together, providing strength and invisibility. But the tears of the sticky snail have the opposite effect and dissolve the bond, turning the secure hold into a vulnerable illusion. She had procured the rare ingredient in advance, carefully preparing it for the evening of the ball in order to publicly humiliate her rival and deprive him of his main advantage, the flawless smile on which much of his charm and influence was built. However, the true goal was not the exposure itself or the laughter of the crowd, but the precise calculation of the recharge time of his escape skill. Because in the game, it is not emotions that are more important than managing the enemy's abilities and control over his resources. Hazel had always been able to save himself with his pink step ability, which allowed him to instantly escape a dangerous situation. But this time, Ruby forced him to waste it by giving in to panic and fear, thereby depriving himself of his last trump card. He leaves the room in dismay, hoping to return later and restore his reputation, not noticing that the trap has already slammed shut, and the decline in performance has become an irreversible process that cannot be corrected with one spectacular appearance. Ruby feels a burning satisfaction from a perfectly calculated move and mentally warns that their next meeting will be much more painful for him, because now she knows all his weaknesses and sees his parameters without embellishment. Soon her attention is drawn to her sister Elizabeth, accompanied by her father, and Ruby's thoughts involuntarily turn to her own family, to the complex ties of blood and expectations that have always weighed on her more heavily than any systemic constraint. Empress of the Empire, Alistair, always acted coldly and distantly towards her children, including Ruby, as if motherhood was not a feeling for her, but a duty subordinated to politics and the grandeur of the throne. Only once, during a severe fever after her rebirth, did her mother touch her forehead with a cool palm. And that brief touch remained the warmest memory, a tiny island of light in a sea of indifference and distance. A later attempt to thank her for that gesture ended in disappointment. She failed to secure an audience, and Ruby realized that even sincere feelings here were subject to a strict schedule and hierarchy of power. When the Empress enters the hall, the guests bow their heads, and the space itself seems to shrink in her presence. Even Ruby, accustomed to her status as a princess, feels small next to the majesty of this figure who personifies the empire. Gathering her courage and suppressing her anxiety, the princess asks for the engagement to be broken with Hazel, causing a wave of shock and disbelief among those present, as such a statement violates the established expectations of the court. But at the crucial moment, the words seem to stick in the throat. An invisible force constrains speech. The system intervenes, and the truth about him cannot be spoken out loud, leaving Ruby trapped between the truth and the algorithm that does not allow her to reveal her cards. Ruby decides to take a desperate step and publicly declares that Hazel allegedly has problems with procreation, which violates palace laws, and her voice sounds unexpectedly firmly over the silent hall, cutting through the music and conversations like a blade that can no longer be returned to its sheath. The hall erupts in whispers as if a wind had blown through the rows of guests, and Empress Alistair slowly rises from her seat, demanding clarification, and her mere movement makes the courtiers straighten up, feeling the weight of the possible consequences. According to the rules of the Astor Empire, such a diagnosis makes marriage impossible, and concealment is considered a serious crime against the crown. So Ruby's accusation sounds not like a personal insult, but a formal blow to the status and future of her fiancé. Ruby knows she's lying, and for a moment, her heart sinks painfully. But she plans to make the accusation true later, so she plays the role of the grief-stricken bride, letting tears glisten in her eyes and hiding the cold calculation behind them. The Empress announces an examination by the court physician and allows the dissolution of the engagement if the diagnosis is confirmed, emphasizing that the honor of the dynasty is above feelings, and her words fall into the silence of the hall as the final verdict of the court. The system immediately lowers Ruby's mother's favorability level, turning notifications an alarming red, and the princess sees the numbers decrease, reminding her that every step she takes is costing her trust. The princess understands the risk. If the deception is revealed, the blow will fall only on her. Her reputation will be destroyed, and support will disappear. But she still remains confident in her plan, because the stakes have long been a matter of life and death. Ancelot enters the hall, despite the guard's attempts to stop him, and his confident gait breaks the tense atmosphere, as if a new figure were entering the decisive phase of the game. His appearance evokes a wave of fear and admiration. The dark aura around him alters the very fabric of the celebration, and the light of the candelabra seems dimmer next to the cold gleam of his gaze. He heads straight towards Ruby, apologizing for being late with a slight smile, and demonstratively takes her hand, emphasizing the closeness and thus intervening in a political scandal without a single hesitation. The guests freeze, and the girls whisper among themselves, amazed by his attention to the princess, because such a gesture from a foreign prince looks like an open declaration of support and a possible alliance. Elizabeth and Sylvia suddenly address Ruby by a nickname known only to players, which makes her wary, as the coincidence seems too precise to be a coincidence. The thought of new hidden players in the game worries her more than the recent scandal, because now the field is becoming multi-layered, and every smile could hide a strategy she doesn't yet know about. Meanwhile, in the restroom, Hazel frantically tries to reattach her dentures and notices her charm level drop to critical levels, and the red numbers before her eyes confirm the scale of her humiliation. The system continues to erode his stats, mockingly assigning derogatory effects and temporary debuffs, turning his once brilliant image into an object of hidden ridicule and status loss. In desperation, he tries to exit the game, demanding that the session be ended and control be restored, hoping that everything that is happening is just a protracted episode that can be interrupted with one click. However, the interface returns an error. Exit is not possible during an active scenario, and the message remains motionless, like a wall against which its attempts to regain its usual security are broken. The realization of the trap comes gradually. He is truly stuck inside a world where pain, fear, and humiliation no longer seem conventional, and the consequences become a frightening reality. Having checked the conditions for the hero's awakening, he understands that the death of his beloved is required for escape, and a cold understanding of the goal begins to displace doubts and the remnants of his previous indecision. Hazel resolves to find Ruby, convincing himself that completing the scenario is the only way to freedom, and in his thoughts the line between calculation and cruelty gradually blurs, giving way to determination to see the game through to the end. Hazel decides to complete the scenario at any cost, finally realizing that it is impossible to leave the game without fulfilling the conditions of awakening, and the fear of a stuck reality gradually gives way to a cold determination to bring the algorithm to the end. He quickly finds Ruby among the guests, confident that even a minor character like her always stands out in a crowd with a special aura, noticeable only to those who see the interface and perceive the world through lines of system code. Meanwhile, Ancelot approaches the princess again, carefully observing her attempts to distance herself, as if checking how deeply she has already been drawn into the web of events and other people's plans. Ruby hides her anxiety behind a flawless smile, although she remembers his previous assassination attempt and how the ruby amulet flashed with a saving light, destroying the intention that could have become fatal for her. The bloody stains on his clothes heighten the tension, lending the image an ominous credibility, but he, as if nothing had happened, walks towards the Emperor, leaving her in confusion and the feeling that another game is unfolding behind the scenes. Alone in the garden, surrounded by cool shadows and whispering leaves, Ruby checks her life timer and realizes that time is running out, and the familiar numbers no longer bring clarity, only heightening the anxious anticipation of the inevitable. Hazel finds her at the fountain and, losing his composure, accuses her of ruining his reputation, not hiding the rage and fear that are intertwined in his voice, betraying a desperate attempt to regain control of the slipping situation. She notices the recharge of his escape skill in the system window and realizes that he is now vulnerable, deprived of his usual safety net, which means that the moment for a decisive step has come right now, before the algorithm gives him a new advantage. Taking advantage of the momentary pause, Ruby delivers a precise blow, after which the system registers damage to his reproductive function, turning the false accusation into reality and cementing her risky plan with an unexpected result. Hazel receives an emergency notification and despairs as she sees confirmation of disaster before her eyes. But soon the interface coldly offers an alternative path, as if the game itself does not allow dead ends and always leaves a backup scenario. The system activates a training scenario of the hero's awakening through the death of his beloved, accompanying the message with a solemn sound signal that sounds both like a sentence and an invitation to a new phase of the game. According to the terms, the death must occur publicly for the transformation into holy light to begin, and this formulation gives the future event the character of a ritual, where personal tragedy becomes an instrument of exaltation. Ruby sees her remaining lifespan suddenly change to unknown And this frightens her far more than the previous timer, because the uncertainty takes away any illusion of preparing for the inevitable outcome. Quest about the death of a beloved appears before your eyes, with a reward for awakening and a bad end note for failure, emphasizing that her existence is reduced to a condition for fulfilling someone else's mission. Hazel accepts the terms without hesitation and activates the newbie bonus, receiving a boost to charisma and a reduction in skill cooldowns, as if the system itself were rewarding him for his willingness to sacrifice what is merely a variable for her. The interface prompts you to choose a target, and it settles on Ruby as your beloved, confirming your choice with the cold certainty of a menu item rather than a living person with a will of their own. At that very moment, a spell is cast on her, causing her heart to beat faster against her will and her thoughts to become confused, as if an invisible hand were rewriting emotional reactions directly into the code of her consciousness. Ruby stands frozen under the effects of the enchantment when Ancelot suddenly appears next to her, breaking the tense moment with his almost silent yet palpable presence. His appearance instantly knocks Hazel off guard, and he, unwilling to test the limits of someone else's power, hastily retreats, activating his fast movement skill and dissolving into space before the situation gets out of control. Ancelot follows the fugitive with an attentive, focused gaze, as if analyzing not the person, but the mechanism of his disappearance itself, trying to discern a pattern in the operation of the ability and the intervention of the algorithm. Left alone with the princess amid the whisper of leaves and the cold light of lanterns, he turns all his attention to her, instantly noticing her attempt to slip away, as if any vibration in the air was already an admission of intent for him. Ruby decides to take advantage of the brief pause and leave before the clash between the two players turns into something far more dangerous and unpredictable than she can calculate in her current state. However, Ancelot gently but persistently stops her, reminding her of the promise he made. And in this calm, one can feel the steely confidence of a man accustomed to ensuring that agreements are fulfilled. His tone remains even and almost polite, but the hidden threat slipping between his words makes her heart clench, as if behind the calm there is a power that can effortlessly change the course of events. He easily exposes her recent lies, catching inconsistencies in the details, and seems to find a strange pleasure in it, like an intellectual game where every mask sooner or later falls. Ruby denies him any physical contact, emphasizing her distance and suspecting hidden intent behind every gesture, because she already knows how dangerous even an innocent touch can be in a world controlled by the system. She slowly retreats, increasing the distance step by step, maintaining an outward calm as the conversation continues in a quiet but tense rhythm, like an unarmed duel. Ancelot notices the difference between her behavior with him and with Hazel, asking uncomfortable questions that sound less like jealousy and more like an attempt to understand the logic of her strategies and hidden motives. He insists he is not a reckless killer, contrary to rumors, and there is a weariness in his voice from being labeled by others, as if he is used to being the monster in other people's stories, without the ability to explain himself. Ruby recalls the attempted attack in the garden, but chooses to hide direct accusations behind a polite smile, realizing that an open confrontation now might be too risky. For a moment, a strange, almost lonely sincerity appears in his expression, a barely noticeable crack in the flawless mask of a prince accustomed to the fear and respect of those around him. Her cautious agreement to temporarily trust him changes the atmosphere between them, and the tension eases, giving way to a fragile balance where only a thin line separates alliance and conflict. At that moment, the silence is cut by an alarm signal, and the palace guards quickly surround the garden, cutting off all escape routes and turning the secluded place into a confined, threatening space. The guards call them bugs and act with frightening synchronicity, as if controlled by a single center, and their movements are devoid of the usual human uncertainty. Among them, Ruby spots familiar faces, including Sarah's, but there's no recognition in her gaze, only a blank focus, as if personality has been erased and replaced by an order. The prince whispers softly about system dogs, hinting at the force behind the guard's actions, and his words sound less like a metaphor than a precise definition of the entities that serve the algorithm. Ruby realizes that she is facing not just a court conspiracy, but the direct intervention of the system itself, which has decided to eliminate the deviation that has disrupted the script, and now her struggle goes beyond human intrigue. Ruby, confused, asks again about the system dogs, and Ancelot calmly clarifies. They are dealing with a script error cleanup squad, a mechanism that the system activates when the narrative begins to deviate from its intended trajectory. He explains that these are not ordinary people, but executors of the algorithm's will, devoid of personal motives. Their task is simple: to eliminate the glitch and return the course of events to its intended course. The guards close in, blades pointed directly at Ruby, and for the first time she understands with icy clarity. She is the target. Not the prince, not the fugitive. Her, the source of the deviation. Ancelot summons a crystalline weapon, sharp, translucent, as if woven from frozen light, and without hesitation enters the fray, intercepting the first blow. Ruby barely manages to avoid the blade, loses her balance, and falls onto the cold garden tiles. At that moment, it becomes clear. She's been marked as a priority target for elimination. Ancelot, repelling attack after attack, briefly remarks that such hunters always strike at the most vulnerable, acting without honor and without rules. As befits an instrument of the system, he fights swiftly and calmly, his movements precise, his strikes economical. Despite his opponent's numerical superiority, he does not retreat, holding the line of defense before her. Ruby watches in horror as he pushes back the attacker step by step and realizes a simple truth. Without him, her story would have ended already. She spots Sarah among the attackers. Her face is familiar, but her gaze is empty, glassy, devoid of recognition, as if her personality had been erased, leaving only her function. As the maid lunges forward, Ancelot throws her aside, intercepting the trajectory of the blow meant for Ruby and getting wounded himself while covering her. The princess is stunned. The one who once tried to take her life now takes the blow for her sake. She quietly says that she won't blame him for Sarah's death. In this situation, there was no choice. This wasn't a clash between people, but a collision with a machine. Ancelot grins and notes that the system has no qualms about eliminating anyone who goes beyond the prescribed script, both puppets and those who break the strings. Ruby bitterly realizes that her attempt to change her destiny has made her the world's mistake. The thought that reality itself could erase her for her willfulness sends a chill far stronger than the fear of blades. She doesn't understand how Ancelot knows about the mechanics of the scenario, the nature of the purge, and the structure of the algorithm. His knowledge goes beyond the scope of a typical character. He calls this world a pre-written story, where any deviation is punished, and freedom is just an illusion that keeps the plot moving. Ruby feels her will collide with the invisible hand that controls destinies, as if lines of code are tightening around her, preventing her from taking an extra step. And then Ancelot unexpectedly offers to help escape beyond the script. Coming closer, he carefully touches her pendant, that same ruby amulet, hinting that it is in it that the key to breaking the cycle and going beyond the boundaries of the history that someone has already written for them is hidden. Ruby notices the system window has reappeared and, with obvious irritation, accuses Ancelot of deleting her and destroying the cleanup agents. Her gaze falls on the plaque with his title, Prince of the Ruinheart Empire, and she demands an explanation, who he really is and why the system displays him differently from the others. Ancelot calmly replies that the agents haven't disappeared completely. They're only temporarily neutralized. The system has already been restored, and its interface is once again active, because the self-correcting mechanism always strives to mend the breach. On Ruby's tablet, the relationship status remains the same, and the lifespan is still listed as unknown. This immutability is more frightening than any countdown. The unknown means the event is already predetermined, but hidden until the right moment. Ruby decides to break off her engagement to Hazen immediately, intending to use rumors of his infertility as a formal basis for a breakup, the only legal way she can think of. Ancelot warns that things aren't so simple. Terminating the contract will trigger a bad ending. In it, Hazen dies, but not before the system pushes him into a desperate fight for salvation, at any cost. The scenario could lead him to kill Ruby for his own awakening. Any attempt to step out of line again would trigger a new wave of purges, and the agents would return without delay. A hopeless choice looms before her. Either become a victim for the sake of someone else's advancement, or perish as a mistake erased by the system. She recalls her former calm life, morning walks, courtly conversations, predictable worries, and bitterly realizes how quickly everything turned into a series of betrayals and hidden sentences. Ancelot extends his hand to her, confirming his intention to help. He drops to one knee, not a romantic gesture, but a solemn one, like an ally's oath before an enemy he cannot see. Ruby reflects on its nature. It sees system windows, but is not a player. It does not depend on artifacts and acts outside the rules, as if it does not obey the main code. Ancelot admits that, in terms of the system, he is the most dangerous bug, having escaped its compulsion and changed the scenario not according to instructions, but of his own free will. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Ball, the system administrator senses a brief disconnect and suspects an unstable element has infiltrated the brilliant palace. Unsure who eliminated the agents, he carefully examines the guests, trying to identify the intruder among the nobility. Ancelot enters the room, his gaze lingers on them, and his suspicions grow. He considers the current player useless, unable to complete even the awakening stage, and keep the victim within the scenario. The administrator decides to personally intervene in the story's development and nudge the hero toward the desired outcome, increasing the pressure and reducing the time for reflection. Meanwhile, Hazen trembles in his room, realizing that without the system window, he's just an ordinary man. The silence makes the memory of the fear of the one who threatened him and the humiliation of his own flight especially poignant. The system still doesn't allow you to exit the game and reminds you of the requirement. The public death of your beloved is the only condition for awakening. After receiving a letter from Prince Orant hinting at rumors and an upcoming hunting festival, Hazen comes to a terrifying conclusion. If he kills Ruby himself in front of the crowd, the condition will be fulfilled, the awakening will occur, and he will finally stop being a pawn in someone else's machine, even if it means paying the ultimate price. On a sunny day, Ruby sits at a table among the girls, trying to appear calm, though she's tense inside. She's declined to participate in her mother's hunting tournament, citing her need to help with an event Elizabeth is organizing. She's haunted by Ancelot's words about how breaking off the engagement would lead to a tragic end. If that happens, Hayden's awakening will end in tragedy, and he's willing to go to extreme measures to achieve that. She remembers the mad glint in his eyes and realizes she must avoid large crowds. One of the conditions for awakening is the death of her beloved in a crowd of over 100 people. Today's appointment seems like a safe pretext, but my mother's birthday is coming up, making it harder to avoid company. The thought of feigning illness seems humiliating, but still preferable to death. The ladies, including Lady Sylvia Windsor, approach her to discuss what happened to Hayden. Their sympathy is mixed with curiosity and hints about his possible feelings. The conversation gradually shifts to Ancelot. The girls recall Ruby appearing on his arm and pepper her with questions about the nature of their relationship. Ruby quickly denies any romantic involvement, trying to quell the rumors. However, the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. Hazel suddenly appears, clearly uninvited to the event. His presence alarms Ruby, even though there's no crowd of people around. She convinces herself that the conditions for an attack aren't yet met. But Elizabeth intervenes, protecting her sister and putting the intruder in his place. Hazel merely reacts mockingly, and at that moment, the system activates. A notification appears about the use of a premium item, available only to the player. A message then appears about the summoning of a monster, a level 48 aquatic kraken. The creature instantly materializes and begins attacking with its tentacles. The banquet hall erupts into chaos. People scatter in panic, screaming and falling, trying to escape the monster's attacks. Ancelot warned about. The crowd is rapidly growing, creating the perfect conditions for tragedy. She realizes that Hazel will take advantage of the confusion to bring the awakening to completion through her death. The danger becomes tangible. Despite her fear, Ruby decides not to run away. The thought that she must stop what's happening herself gradually replaces her panic. In the chaos, Hazel offers her protection, but she feels she can only rely on herself now. The scenario demands a victim, and she has no intention of becoming one. Ancelot's confidence. She finds the resolve to resist the system, even if it conflicts with her previous desire to avoid participation. The kraken continues to destroy the hall, but a cold clarity dawns within her. The situation no longer seems random. It's a carefully calculated move. Ruby decides to intervene and change the course of events on her own, realizing that this is the only way she can break the chain of system-imposed conditions. The girl instantly understands. Right now, Hazen is more dangerous than the monster itself. The kraken is just a tool, and the real plan is hidden in the eyes of the man who is looking at her with too much intentness. When he extends his hand, she deliberately takes a step back, letting her voice waver and feigning fear, to buy herself a few precious seconds to calculate her next move. Without giving him time to register the change in her gaze, Ruby suddenly thrusts him forward, right into the swiftly descending tentacle of a giant kraken. The monster instantly reacts to its new target, its massive body spinning, the water rising like a wall, and the full fury of the summoned creature falls not on the crowd, but on Hazen. Hazen dodges the crushing blows, rolling across the wet tiles, barely escaping his grasp. Tentacles smash columns and benches, spraying water in all directions, and the air fills with the sound of breaking stone. Ruby watches from afar, cool and collected, determined to ruin his plan. Even without knowing all the details, all she needs to do is disrupt the key moment. The knights try to form a defense, shouting orders, forming shields, and calling for reinforcements. But a system message flashes above the chaos. The summoned monster can only be defeated by an awakened hero. The letters glow with a cold light, mocking the efforts of the humans. Since Hazen hasn't yet awakened, the situation seems hopeless. The system is invisibly pushing him toward the only way out, to complete the condition through Ruby's death. The pressure is almost tangible, like an invisible hand guiding the course of the tragedy. In the midst of the battle, one of the tentacles catches him. The blow is too powerful, too precise. A death notification flashes above Hazen, and the world seems to freeze for a split second. Ruby flinches, her heart clenches painfully, but she understands. For the player, this is not the end, but merely a restart. An automatic rescue is triggered during the tutorial. The space is illuminated by a blinding light. The waters part, and Hazen returns to life, shrouded in radiance, like a reborn prophet of his own story. The compatibility wheel skill activates. A wave of invisible energy spreads across the area, and the facial expressions of those around him change. Doubt disappears. Fear gives way to rapturous trust. People begin to perceive his actions as the only right and heroic ones. Hazen turns to Ruby, and no longer feigning pretense, declares that she must die for his awakening. There's no longer the previous uncertainty in his voice, only a cold conviction. He calls her an NPC, a function, a step in the game, not a person. The girl clenches her fists and refuses to accept it. She says that no one is born just to be someone else's victim, that even in the world of scripts, there is free will. But he only laughs, briefly, condescendingly, as if hearing childish naivety. Realizing she can't stand alone against the system and the awakened player, Ruby tries to call for help. Her voice is desperate but sincere, appealing to the knights, to the girls, to anyone still capable of independent thought. However, the wheel of compatibility is already in effect. Those around him see Hazen as a protector, a hero, a savior from the monster. They convince Ruby not to resist, to return to him, to trust his plan, not realizing they are repeating an imposed will. Realizing that people are under the influence of the ability, the girl retreats. The ground seems to shift beneath her feet. The loneliness becomes palpable, and the despair almost deafening. At the critical moment, her amulet flares with a crimson light. The ruby pendant heats up, and a protective shell forms around Ruby, a transparent dome in which the air trembles like a taut string. The skill's pressure weakens, unable to penetrate the ancient defense. Ancelot comes out to her through the spray and debris. His gaze is reproachful and worried. He quietly notes that she turns to him only at the very last moment, when all other paths have already collapsed. He summons an icy weapon, a blade glowing with a cold blue light, causing the surrounding temperature to drop and the water droplets to freeze. Standing next to Ruby, shoulder to shoulder, he takes a stance, ready to intervene in the imposed scenario and challenge not only Hyzen, but the system itself. Ruby, wiping away tears, looks anxiously at Ancelot, who suddenly appears amid the chaos. His calm smile seems to reflect the certainty that he knows more than she does. Fear and determination boil within her, for the amulet that summoned her could change the entire outcome. She explains that she needs the bug to stop Hazel and find a way to break out of the imposed scenario. Every step and every decision feels like gold, as the wrong move could lead to disaster, and Ruby understands the gravity of the moment. Ancelot merely smiles enigmatically, reminding him that he calls himself a system error. His words sound simultaneously threatening and supportive. At that moment, a red system marker appears above his head, flickering and pulsating like a living organism. The inscription indicates that he is a system anomaly, and the space around him begins to shift. Suddenly, familiar system windows and prompts disappear, and the world seems to lose its familiar boundaries, plunging Ruby into a sense of unreality. Ancelot instantly appears before Hazel, blocking his sword. He trembles with fear, realizing that his usual strength no longer matters. The enemy's name has disappeared from the system, and the chaos is becoming more palpable. Hazel's head, the system repeating about an unexpected anomaly. Ruby feels reality itself cracking and distorting around her, as if reacting to the glitch. Everything is moving too fast, and every moment is crucial. The kraken's tentacle strikes Hazel, and the blow is fatal. He falls to the floor, blood splattering across the stone slabs. Ruby can't believe what's happened, yet feels a strange sense of relief. The danger to her has diminished. She looks at the body and notices the absence of a respawn window. The realization that Hazel is truly dead fills her with conflicting emotions. Fear and anxiety are replaced by relief and a sense of responsibility. But the joy doesn't last long. The kraken is still alive, its tentacles wreaking havoc, and Ruby feels the pressure of time. Every step forward requires not only strength but also strategy, for the monster is enormous and unpredictable. Suddenly, a system message appears before her. The quest, Death of a Beloved, is complete. The conditions have been met. The reward has been activated. Ruby is enveloped in light, and it takes her a moment to understand how the awakening occurred without her death, which adds to her feeling of strange elation. Status update title: Glorious Worldmaster, Level 11, entitled Paxoi. Ruby Assistant, the system's glowing interface, confirms that she is now the world's protagonist. Ruby's heart beats faster. Responsibility weighs heavy, but her new strength gives her confidence. Ancelot congratulates her, as if everything that happened was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. He reminds her that it's now Ruby's responsibility to manage the situation and protect everyone around her from danger. Ruby is stunned, still unaccustomed to being a player, and the monster is getting closer. Fear and doubt intertwine, as she realizes the level of danger has surpassed anything she's ever encountered. Despite her fear, the girl realizes that only the protagonist can defeat the kraken. Everything around her is crumbling. The tentacles are reaching for her, and Ruby feels the weight of the choice: retreat or fight. She watches the girl collapse next to her, her tears strengthening her resolve. Ruby understands that she can't trust others to protect her, and that only her actions will determine the outcome. Her heart fills with determination. A plan forms in her mind: to use all her strength and skills to defeat the monster. Every breath reminds her of the importance of this moment and that the lives of many depend on it. Clutching her sword, the princess takes a step toward the monster. The light from the amulet reflects in her eyes, giving her confidence and courage. She feels the energy of awakening permeate every cell, preparing her for the final test. The world around her trembles, as if aware of her determination. The kraken cannot be underestimated, but fear gives way to adrenaline and the will to win. Every step she takes becomes a challenge and a testament to the power of her new status. Ruby recalls Ancelot's advice and realizes that all his actions were aimed at helping her take responsibility. His support and calm give her the strength to act. Confidence rises within her, Her awakening is no accident, and her destiny now is to be the protagonist. Fear and doubt recede, and determination envelops her mind and body like armor before the inevitable battle. The princess, gathering her strength, points the sword she'd collected from Hazel at the kraken flying toward her. With a swing, the monster is cut in half, and the explosive light blinds her for a moment. The girl steps back, catching her breath, and feeling an incredible sense of relief at having defeated a monster that usually only the protagonist can defeat. A system notification flashes overhead. You have defeated level 49 Kraken. Your level has increased. Ruby can hardly believe her eyes as she lowers her sword, as if realizing the magnitude of her own feat. Every cell in her body is filled with a mixture of fear, surprise, and pride. Ancelot run up to her, applauding. Their delight and gratitude ease the tension of the last minutes. Ruby sees the tears of one of the servants, who thanks her for saving her life. And something inside her aches as she realizes her actions had real meaning. Ruby looks at the chaos around her. Some crying, some laughing, some sighing with relief after surviving a mortal threat. It all reminds her that her efforts weren't in vain. The responsibility and consequences now seem palpably real, almost tangible. Suddenly, her mother rushes toward her, screaming, her face contorted in panic. Ruby watches in confusion, trying to understand what has caused such a reaction. Her mother's usual indifference contrasts with genuine anxiety, and it seems almost unbelievable to her. The Empress runs up, asking about the Kraken situation. One of the knights explains that the monster emerged from the lake, and that the knight commander, Hayden, died trying to defend the palace. Ruby feels a mixture of bitterness and relief. Her own power saved people who would otherwise have perished. The mother, stunned by what she saw, gives orders. Assist the wounded, strengthen the guard. Ruby realizes that even the Empress recognizes her ability to influence the course of events. A warmth flares in her chest. For the first time in many years, she feels seen and appreciated. The Empress invites Ruby into her living room, where tea is served. With tension and slight embarrassment, the girl listens to her mother's questions, trying to understand her attitude. She catches her mother's eye and suddenly notices a genuine attention that previously seemed impossible. Ruby explains that the awakening of her sword talent occurred spontaneously the moment she replaced Hazel. The Empress listens attentively, noting her daughter's prowess in a critical situation and praising her for her courage and ability to act in danger. The girl reflects on her motives, not duty, not love for the hero, but the need to protect people. She clutches the dress in her hands, not mentioning the fear and anxiety inside her. This was a moment of responsibility, when the lives of many depended on her actions. Ruby's attention is drawn to the sign above her mother's head. Her affection level suddenly rises to 911. Confused, she realizes that the praise and care were directed at herself, not Hazel, who is no longer in this world. Tears well up in the princess's eyes. For the first time, she receives praise from her mother, who had previously remained cold and indifferent. A feeling of acceptance and recognition is born within the girl, as if an invisible thread connects their hearts. The Empress smiles and allows Ruby to call her Mama, as if rekindling an old family bond. They spend the rest of the time laughing and enjoying tea. Ruby feels a rare sense of calm and confidence that had previously been unattainable. Walking down the hallway, Ruby contemplates her new status as a player, realizing that her decisions and actions now have global consequences. The awakened power and responsibility fill her mind with unsettling yet exciting thoughts about the future. Suddenly, a voice from behind addresses her. It's the man she'd spotted earlier, the second prince of the Alistarian Empire, Orand. His words and gaze immediately draw Ruby's attention. She senses the old tension between them and a premonition of a potential conflict. The prince asks about swordsmanship. Ruby understands that her actions are already perceived as a challenge and a potential threat to him. She remains silent, taking her time answering, mentally preparing herself for dialogue or battle, if necessary. Oranda's head displays a negative affection level, evoking mixed feelings in Ruby. She realizes that old resentments and mistrust still linger, but she is now becoming stronger and more independent. Ruby reflects on the past day, defeating the Kraken, her mother's praise, her renewed strength. It all reminds her that she is now a central figure in a world where every action matters, and her decisions can change the outcome of history. The girl takes a step toward the future, feeling that her personal strength and awakened abilities allow her to protect those around her. Her new confidence is intertwined with anxiety, but fear no longer paralyzes her actions. She feels responsibility and strength becoming part of her being. Every movement, look, and thought is now filled with determination, because the world and its inhabitants depend on how she manages her abilities. Ruby realizes her journey is only just beginning. Defeating the kraken was just the first step. A deepening understanding dawns within her that her abilities and courage will be tested again. But now she's ready for any challenge. With every breath, the girl feels renewed energy and a connection with the world around her. She is ready to protect those she holds dear and move forward, regardless of danger. Her sword, skills, and determination have become a true pillar of strength, one she can rely on in any challenge. Ruby recalls her childhood when she secretly trained with a sword, wanting to earn her mother's respect. A gentle breeze whispers memories of Iran's words, accusing her of bringing shame to the royal family. Fear and the desire to prove oneself intertwine, creating a sense of past pain. Returning to reality, the girl realizes that Iran's dislike for her began long ago. Every harsh word, every glance of his was a test she didn't understand. It becomes clear that his suspicions and jealousy are the product of childhood memories and family rules. Conversation with her brother Oren leaves her with mixed feelings, curiosity, and a hint of apprehension. She notes that she was the only one who ever spoke to her mother alone, which explains his wariness. For the first time, she sees how past events influence current family relationships. Coming closer, Ruby gently asks if he's interested in her conversation with her mother. A slight smile, a flick of her hand, a flick of her hair. These details reveal her confidence and subtle communication strategy. Every gesture is important, every glance is meaningful. Oren cries out in fear and irritation, unsure how to react to her words. Ruby feels the power of the moment, realizing that control of the situation is now partially in her hands. His reactions are a mirror of her past efforts and present decisions. Elizabeth suddenly appears, intervening in the tense scene. Her intervention neutralizes Oranda's anger, and Ruby is relieved, knowing her sister's support is reliable. This moment strengthens the trust between them and adds warmth to the atmosphere. Ruby's older sister carefully checks her for any harm. Her sister's touching gesture, stroking her face, awakens in Ruby a sense of security and acceptance she hadn't felt before. She understands that her sister's love is genuine and unconditional. Ruby reflects on the system and her initial mistake of misreading Hazel's level of affection. This realization helps her understand why she built boundaries and avoided closeness with others. Now she sees that Elizabeth's care was genuine. Her sister admits that she always defended her, even in front of Hazel and her brother. Elizabeth's love and support are unconditional, rooted in genuine affection. Ruby feels for the first time that not all of her family cares, and this gives her strength. Elizabeth congratulates Ruby on awakening her swordsmanship and tells her that all the ladies have returned to safety. Ruby notes that her sister has misunderstood her relationship with Ancelot, but accepts it calmly, understanding that the safety of the people is paramount. That evening, the princess strolls through the garden and notices Ancelot by the gazebo. His lack of a status and affectation sign initially fills her with a sense of apprehension, but then with relief. She realizes she now sees him simply as an ally, not a player in the system. A conversation with Ancelot reveals that he foresaw her awakening as Hazel. She is struck by his calm and confidence, simultaneously exasperated and amused. Their dynamic is built on trust, playfulness, and a hidden seriousness. Ruby recalls his words about how he would help her use any situation to escape danger. She understands that it was precisely thanks to these actions that she was able to survive, and she recognizes the responsibility her new role places upon her. She angrily yells at Ancelot, accusing him of taking things lightly, but at the same time, she realizes that his support saved her life. Their interaction balances on the edge of humor, irritation, and genuine concern. The guy points out the benefits of becoming a player who protects herself and others. Ruby understands that, despite the frustration and fear, her role opens up opportunities that the average person wouldn't have. The girl reflects on how awakening her swordsmanship and defeating the monster brought her mother's recognition. This becomes a symbol of her strength and ability to influence events that previously seemed beyond her control. Ruby notes that through the system, she saw her mother's true feelings. She realizes that the praise and care were directed at her, not Hazel, and for the first time, she feels pride in her own achievements. Deep down, the girl understands that, having become the main character, she now bears the responsibility of uniting her allies and preparing for future dangers. The weight of the role evokes anxiety, but also a determination to act. Ancelot smiles, proposing a joint effort against the Light Dragon. Ruby is horrified by the idea of a deadly mission, comparing herself to the dead Hazel, and realizing that her life is now real and final. Fear and responsibility intertwine in her thoughts. She understands that she can't simply quit. Every action has consequences. Awareness of her own mortality strengthens her resolve and caution, making her more mature. Finally, Ruby looks at Ancelot, contemplating the battles ahead and her choices. She feels a mixture of fear, distrust, and a new understanding of a world in which her decisions truly matter. Having witnessed Hayden's endless deaths in battle with the kraken, Ruby despairingly admits her own fear. Even if the chosen hero died time and time again, she has neither the strength nor the confidence to repeat his path and survive such a battle. Ancelot cautiously notes that completing all the scenarios could destroy the system itself and free it, but he doesn't hide the risk. He offers his help, extending his hand, as if forging a new alliance, one based on both trust and calculation. Ruby doubts it. No one has yet completed the final scenario, which requires defeating the Light Dragon. Players have spent enormous amounts of money, only to fail. And she's not even a player, just a character, deprived of access to buffs and items. The thought of this final, supremely difficult test frightens her more than death itself. If she dies, it will be the end with no escape, because in her former world, she already died once and does not want to repeat her fate. Ruby wonders why it's necessary to kill the Light Dragon at all. The answer about maintaining world order sounds vague and artificial to her, like an excuse created by the system itself to mask its own failures. Gradually, she comes to a bold conclusion. Perhaps the dragon is not the source of chaos, but merely a mistake, an inconvenient element that the system seeks to eliminate for the sake of its own stability and control. Refusing to be a pawn any longer, Ruby resolutely removes the pendant, a symbol of her connection to the system and Ancelot, and returns it, declaring that she will no longer participate in either the scenarios or the dragon hunt. The boy is left alone and ponders her. At first, he was driven by simple curiosity, but over time, his admiration grew. The princess, who had seemed spoiled, turned out to be a skilled swordswoman and a person far more profound than expected. He realizes that Ruby exists outside the system, like an alien from another dimension or a special glitch, unconstrained by its laws. That's why he risked causing the death of the previous player to transfer the role to her. The plan originally involved giving the pendant to Hazel to improve his chances of defeating the Light Dragon. But Ruby's use of the stone ruined the calculations and changed the course of the entire game. Ancelot is amazed that she was able to activate the necklace's power without his permission. No one had ever managed this before, and this fact alone speaks to her exceptional nature. Trying to remember the previous owner of the pendant, he discovers a frightening emptiness. Only the image of a beautiful woman with a warm smile remains in his memory, but her face and name disappear, as if erased by someone else's will. This oblivion troubles him, but he suppresses his doubts, convincing himself that the past is not so important. The main thing is to fulfill the scenario's final goal and ensure the death of the Light Dragon. It was for this reason that he arrived in the Empire of Alistair, ready to intervene in the order of the world, despite possible sanctions from the system for excessive independence and interference. Ancelot realizes that he has opened up too much to Ruby, allowed himself more emotion and frankness than he should have for someone playing the role of hidden observer and coordinator. Essentially, any awakened hero capable of bringing the scenario to its conclusion would have been enough for him. But now his calculations are tied specifically to her, and this makes the game much more dangerous. He is convinced that the red stone exists to destroy the light dragon, and that Ruby is capable of extracting its heart, something that previously seemed unattainable even for the best players. Meanwhile, Ruby herself firmly resolves not to follow the imposed path. Her refusal is not simply fear, but an attempt to reclaim her freedom of choice and escape the dictates of the system's invisible windows. In the quiet of the palace night, Ancelot ponders the price of interference. Violation of order always brings punishment, and perhaps the consequences have already begun to manifest. And yet, despite his cold calculations, his thoughts return to Ruby again, to the only person who managed to shake his plans and make him doubt the impeccability of his own strategy. 3 days later, a system notification appears over Ruby's head, signaling the start of the main scenario. Proof of a hero. She decides to ignore it, refusing to press the activation button despite persistent pop-ups. The system literally begins begging her to continue, bombarding her with messages and complaints, behaving even more strangely than it did during Hayden's time. Ruby notices this anomaly, but still stubbornly refuses to obey. Her mother's birthday and the evening ball are approaching. Ruby is getting ready for the party, changing her clothes, and remembers that Ancelot hasn't been around her since the player switch. There are rumors of his illness, but she doubts their veracity. A man capable of destroying system windows is unlikely to break so easily. However, his disappearance still worries her. She finds herself wanting to check on his condition herself, although she stubbornly convinces herself that this is not anxiety, but only a natural reaction to the sudden absence of an ally. Along the way, she encounters Oren's brother. His cold gaze is accompanied by another sarcastic system message, offering her a way to get revenge if she agrees to continue the scenario. Ruby abruptly ends the prompt and demonstratively bids her brother farewell, leaving him irritated. She's surprised to realize that her former admiration for him has long since vanished. The system flags her refusal to participate in the scenario as a problem and hints that the player needs to acknowledge their role. Ruby feels like she's being gently nudged toward the inevitable. Ancelot appears unexpectedly. His calm and even slight smile confuse her, causing conflicting feelings and a racing heart. Ruby explains that she came to check out the rumors about his illness. He replies that he's fine and remarks that she looks perfectly healthy. She's painfully aware that he didn't seek out her. There's a hint of mockery in his words, as if he suspects her of deliberately spreading rumors to secure a meeting. Ancelot openly admits he's figured out her ruse. His insight irritates her, as around him, she often forgets the need to keep her distance. Ruby chides herself for being too open. She's uneasy that he acts so naturally, as if they've long had a special connection. She tries to end the conversation and leave, citing preparations for the ball, but he stops her with a question about his future plans. Ancelot reminds her that she came here of her own accord, wanting to say something. His words are gentle, but they convey the intent to keep her close. Ruby feels an internal conflict between the desire to keep her distance and a strange attraction that destroys her determination to completely ignore everything that is happening. The system is still waiting for her decision, but at this point, a personal conversation in which omissions, suspicions, and hidden feelings are mixed becomes much more important. Ancelot invites her to stay a little longer, addressing her with exaggerated respect, which only increases the tension between them. Her resolve to abandon the script begins to waver not because of the pressure of the system, but because of a complex relationship with the one who understands her best. The evening before the ball takes a new turn in their game, where Ruby's choice is determined not only by the logic of survival, but also by the place Ancelot occupies in her destiny. Ancelot mockingly chides Ruby for thinking about another man and ignoring her partner. His light tone conceals jealousy, and Ruby sheepishly defends herself, denying any hint of infidelity. He declares that it's best to hurry and escort her to the ball to avoid any unnecessary rumors. Despite her inner doubts, Ruby walks beside him, allowing herself to be led through the palace corridors. Along the way, she notices that he no longer insists on moving forward with the script. Ancelot merely smiles and admits that he won't force her unless she's ready to continue her journey to defeat the Light Dragon. Ruby is surprised by his easy compliance. He replies that he knows how to wait, and prefers to wait until she changes her mind of her own free will. His words ring with calm confidence. The ball begins solemnly. Ruby enters the hall on Ancelot's arm, and the courtiers immediately begin whispering, discussing their joint appearance and possible hints of an alliance. The empress has already taken her place and is addressing the guests, recalling the recent crisis that was averted thanks to decisiveness and coordinated action. She then calls Princess Ruby forward. The girl steps forward and bows, greeting her mother with solemn words and emphasizing her greatness as ruler of the empire. The empress is presented with a huge golden sword, a legendary weapon with which she once fought on the battlefield, crushing enemies on horseback. In recognition of Ruby's accomplishments, her mother presents her with this magnificent blade. For the court, this becomes a powerful gesture of trust and official recognition of her power and status. Ruby is shocked. It is with this sword that her childhood memories are connected, and her dream of one day becoming like her mother, strong, fearless, and worthy of respect. At that moment, a system notification about receiving the great sword of Azistra flashes before her eyes, confirming that the reward has been recognized even by the system itself. Ruby, holding back her emotions, thanks the Empress. She announces that the first honor of the ball tonight will be a dance with the princess, sparking a wave of surprised whispers among the nobility. For the courtiers, this is a sign of special favor, an almost official elevation for Ruby. Many are perplexed about what will happen to Prince Oren's position now. Oren himself presses his lips together, trying to maintain his composure, but the tension in his face betrays an internal storm and wounded pride. The ball, which began as an ordinary celebration, turns into a scene of political declaration. Before the entire empire, Ruby is recognized as a worthy heir to her mother's military glory. Ruby was thrilled to be given the first dance of the evening. Traditionally, it's performed by the guest of honor, and many expected that, after nearly 20 years, the Empress herself would take center stage. The Duke of Hamilton, her brother Warren's father, was especially counting on this. Despite his closeness to the Empress, he had never received official status as her husband, and therefore had every reason to hope for this sign of recognition. Ruby realizes the honor bestowed upon her. She convinces herself not to dwell on other people's expectations. The Empress herself made the decision, so there's no reason to doubt it. Looking back at Ancelot, she notices his calm smile amidst the general confusion. Their appearance together had already sparked rumors, but the first dance gives it a whole new meaning. Unexpectedly, she decides to approach Ancelot and invites him to dance. He accepts with courteous gallantry, kisses her hand, and leads her to the center of the room, amid the enthusiastic whispers of the guests. As Ruby watches his horrific dance, she recalls their recent conversation. Behind the outward serenity in his gaze lurked the strange, almost painful melancholy of a man who has long awaited something unattainable. The idea that a killer could appear so lonely seems contradictory and unsettling to her. This inconsistency makes her view him differently. During the dance, he hugs her tighter than she expected, and she becomes flustered. His quiet laughter disconcerts her, and to hide her nervousness, she tries to focus on the smooth shine of the parquet floor. She soon notices something odd. Despite his elegant appearance, Ancelot moves awkwardly and completely out of rhythm. His steps are erratic, and she has to duck to avoid stepping on each other's toes. He admits it's his first time dancing. This sounds incredible to a prince, but he explains that he wasn't popular in his homeland and rarely found partners at balls. Ruby understands that his past and reputation may have intimidated those around him. Even she herself once felt intimidated by him. He asks her to focus on the dance, but she effortlessly manages to outperform him. His smile, however, remains sincere and slightly mocking, as if he's genuinely amused by what's happening. When the music finally stops, Ruby feels a sense of relief. The dance was much more challenging than she expected, but the couple looked harmonious, drawing admiring comments from the guests. Courtiers are beginning to speculate about the political implications of their alliance. Some believe such closeness could strengthen relations between their states. Arm in arm with the princess, Ancelot leaves the hall, while the animated discussions around him continue. The ball gradually devolves into informal conversations and hidden intrigues. Later, while the prince was wiping her forehead in the hallway, Ruby again noticed the absence of the familiar system sign above his head. This absence still seemed strange to her, out of sync with the logic of the world. The festive evening, which began with triumph, turns into a series of new questions for her about politics, about Ancelot's past, and what place he occupies in her destiny. In the hallway after the dance, Ancelot, breathing heavily, wipes away his sweat and asks with a hint of mockery if he's tired Ruby out. She shyly replies that he nearly crushed her during the awkward steps and tries to hide her embarrassment. He takes her hand and places a handkerchief in it, asking her to hold it, then informs her that he'll be out for a bit. Ruby is left alone, wondering where he's headed and what he's up to. Sylvia immediately catches up with her, outraged that the prince would allow himself such a familiar gesture. Her words are harshly condemnatory, as the prince's reputation as a murderer belies his image as a gallant cavalier. Sylvia says that recently a young lady tried to speak to him, but he responded so rudely that even she, usually reserved in her expressions, could not find a more gentle word. Ancelot behaves quite politely in her presence. She doesn't understand why his manners are so different and what lies behind this contradiction. Marcus Winchester's house. Ruby recognizes his name immediately. In the original story, he was one of the heroes and the protagonist's first loyal ally, known as the Shield of Light. To her shock, the system window shows Klaus's disposition towards her is extremely low, -100 and below. They've never met, and she doesn't understand the reason for such obvious hostility. Sylvia introduces Ruby as the third princess and a close friend. Klaus bows politely, but his favorability meter plummets even further, despite his impeccable manners. Even when he kisses her hand and utters formal words of respect, the significance diminishes again. The princess is at a loss. Outwardly, he doesn't show hatred, but the system registers the opposite. Meanwhile, Ancelot, having abandoned her, enters one of the palace rooms, where he deals with the assassins who have infiltrated the residence. He coldly examines the bodies, realizing that they are the men sent to eliminate him. He speculates that the system will send agents to clean up, but the attacker's origins point to his home kingdom. Once finished, he tidies up, not wanting to appear in front of Ruby covered in blood. Cedric catches him, but doesn't raise an alarm. They exchange a brief word, and Cedric notices Ancelot's affection for the third princess. The prince brushes off the hints and returns to the hall, realizing he's been delayed longer than he'd intended. He doesn't want to keep her waiting. Entering the ballroom, he encounters an unexpected scene. One of the courtiers loudly expresses dissatisfaction with the fact that the empress bestowed a special honor on Ruby and not on Prince Oren. Ruby stands calmly, showing no sign of alarm despite the criticism. Ancelot notices that she holds herself with dignity and seems completely unaffected by the accuser's words. And yet, irritation rises within him. He doesn't understand why her composure doesn't calm him, but instead provokes his own unusual anger. The ball, which had begun peacefully, was interrupted by Duke Hamilton. He publicly rebuked the Empress, declaring that Prince Oren had made a great effort at the border and deserved to receive her sword more than the illegitimate princess. The Empress coldly asks if he has said everything he wanted to say and reminds him that such arguments are inappropriate in the midst of a celebration. The Duke is forced to retreat, but the tension in the room remains palpable. Ruby decides to leave so as not to spoil her mother's evening with her presence. However, at that moment, the system displays a message. Empress Christina Joanna Azita is concerned about her. Ruby turns around and sees her mother's gaze, realizing she's the one she's worried about. Her worry isn't about the scandal itself, but about the fact that the blow is aimed at her daughter. The princess realizes that if Elizabeth had received the sword, there would have been fewer objections. Her background makes her an easy target for the nobility, and so the discontent has fallen squarely on her. Ancelot approaches her and quietly asks if she's truly not hurt. Ruby admits she's been accustomed to neglect since childhood, and now she's more touched by her mother's concern than by other people's words. But the prince doesn't share her calm. Anger boils within him, not because of the scenario, but because of the humiliation itself. Even the system pushes him toward revenge, suggesting the use of the player's abilities. Ruby gives up on the idea of revenge, but Ancelot asks to borrow an item from her inventory, a reward for defeating the kraken. He promises he won't kill anyone. Having received the purple vial, he leaves with a barely perceptible smirk. Ruby senses he's up to something fishy, but chooses to pretend she doesn't notice. Later, the celebration continues. Guests bring gifts, congratulations are exchanged, and the atmosphere becomes lively again. Ancelot casually treats Ruby to snacks, as if nothing had happened. Among the new arrivals, she notices a woman she once saw next to Hyzen. The memory flashes instantly and disturbingly. When she begins to speak in the saint's name, her voice sounds different, deeper, and alien. Her expression seems empty, as if she lacks a will of her own. Ruby senses that this isn't just a guest, but something else, as if someone is using her as a conduit. The air in the room grows tense. The party, barely recovered from the scandal, once again finds itself on the brink of a new shock, and the girl realizes that the calm of this evening was only an appearance. The saint, bearing the gifts, stands before the assembled company and continues to solemnly proclaim the prophecy of the hero from the line of Aziza, who is destined to fulfill the proof of the hero and glorify the name of the deity throughout the land, elevating faith and strengthening the influence of the cult of light throughout the continent. Ruby recalls the contents of the original Chronicle Light, which spoke not of blood and dynasty, but of the bearer of the power of light, the chosen one, capable of stealing the heart of a light dragon and passing a test of will, not origin. According to ancient legend, the god of light once sealed a dragon in the depths of the world, but over time the seal weakened, cracks in the barrier multiply, and the threat of new chaos becomes more real and tangible. The previous prophecy promised glory to the one who inherited the power of light and managed to harness it, but the current revelation is pointedly aimed exclusively at royal blood, as if the very concept of chosenness has been narrowed down to a family title. A distortion of meaning strikes Ruby. Responsibility now shifts to her family, rather than to an abstract hero whose qualities would be determined by spirit and actions, not by pedigree. Ancelot stops her gently with a gesture and draws attention to the saint's strange gray eyes, motionless, glassy, devoid of a spark of personal will and living doubt. The girl recognizes that empty gaze. She's seen it before in those whose consciousness has been suppressed, and she instantly understands that the woman is acting under external control, like a puppet. The guy quietly explains that the saint has become a cleansing agent, a tool subordinate to the system administrator and deprived of the right to make her own choices. The system responds to his words with a flash of notifications and calls the administrator the keeper of order, an entity that corrects the world's errors for the sake of stability and narrative integrity. The prince clarifies that the administrator's responsibilities include not only fixing bugs, but also ensuring the smooth progress of the script, even if it means sacrificing people. It reveals that individuals with excessive indicators, too bright, too influential, can be forcibly transformed into agents, completely losing their independence and turning into functions. Ruby remembers the maid Syrah, whose behavior had previously seemed unnatural and subdued to her, as if an invisible chain of command hid behind her calm. The realization of the scale of the interference makes her angry and feels like she is being deliberately pushed to speed up the plot, as if time in this world is being artificially compressed. She understands that proving one's worth as a hero is directly tied to defeating the Light Dragon, a creature that is nearly impossible to defeat for anyone who is not a player or an awakened being. The prophecy cannot be ignored. The influence of the cult of light on the continent is enormous, and any doubt in the saint's words can be interpreted as heresy or weakness of power. Refusal to fulfill the will of heaven would damage the empress's reputation, sow doubts among the nobility, and place the empire in a dangerous political position. Ancelot suggests that the administrator himself is behind the manipulations, acting through subordinate agents to return history to the right track. Ruby connects this to the previous intervention in Hyzen's fate and the appearance of the summoning horn, which seemed to appear out of nowhere at a critical moment. She decides that the system cannot be allowed to use people as tools with impunity, turning their lives into consumables for the sake of a smooth plot. The next day, the Empress gathers the children around a long table, and in the tense silence, it becomes clear. One of them will have to go to prove himself a hero, despite the mortal risk, the political consequences, and the possible play of forces hidden behind the veil of prophecy. Ruby notices that her brother Orant, the second prince of the Azure Empire, is overcome with genuine fear before going against the Light Dragon, and his anxiety is reflected even in the system status with a catastrophic drop in favor, as if reality itself is recording his panic. After waking up, Ruby began to see detailed characteristics of those around her, including a new elite-level category, and from these dry numbers, it became clear that Orant's strength was far from outstanding, despite the grandiose title and the expectations of the court. She recalls that her brother was unable to defeat even Hyzen in his early stages of development, when he had not yet reached level 10, which particularly clearly highlights the difference in their potential and combat value. The idea that such a warrior could supposedly subdue the monsters on the border seems illogical to her, since without an overwhelming superiority in level, monsters do not retreat and do not stop appearing without a trace. Nevertheless, rumors of his victory quickly took root, and the Duke of Hamilton persistently maintained the image of the prince as the savior of the frontiers, turning the dubious incident into political capital. The empress, tired of waiting, abruptly declares that she will not submit to the pressure of the Great Temple, which serves the god Balder, and has influence comparable to royal power in small states. She openly expresses contempt for the Pope of the Temple, with whom she has long been in a cold feud, and her insolence sounds almost blasphemous, causing a mixture of fear and admiration among the courtiers. Ruby understands that such a defiant stance could provide the archbishops with a convenient pretext for political attack, since the religious structure controls countless regional churches. Later, leaving the palace without the obligatory escort of knights or maids, Ruby feels a new independence, as the awakened power of the Swordmaster allows her to no longer hide behind others' backs. The unexpected news that the Duke of Hamilton has suddenly gone bald is surrounded by rumors and ridicule, and the cancelled meeting only increases the Empress's irritation and the tension behind the scenes. Ruby realizes that the disguise potion lent to Ancelot was the cause, and is alarmed to realize that a harmless prank has turned into a high-profile incident with political consequences. Understanding the scale of the potential scandal, she steps aside to soberly assess the situation and consider steps that could soften the blow to the palace's reputation. At this point, the system window suddenly admits that this is the first time it has gone outside the palace with her, which completely destroys her idea of the immutability of the game interface. It turns out that the previous window was replaced due to a serious failure caused by some malicious bug, and the current assistant is only a temporary intermediary in a more complex structure. Ruby begins to understand that there is something more behind the familiar interface, a control system with its own administrator, and the window only transmits instructions and ensures that the script is followed. When asked directly about who exactly is controlling the process, the mediator evades the answer, emphasizing the limitations of his role and increasing the girl's suspicions. Frustrated by the lack of clarity, Ruby sends her annoying companion away, even though she knows deep down that losing the system's clues could make her journey far more dangerous. Left alone, she decides to take a walk around the city to escape the palace intrigues and to independently appreciate the atmosphere of the capital without the filter of script instructions. Looking at the streets, shops, and passers-by, Ruby increasingly perceives this world not as a game, but as a living reality, where behind every rumor, there are consequences. During her walk, Klaus, Sylvia's brother, unexpectedly approaches her, and his sudden appearance on the city street foreshadows a new development in the complicated story. While walking, Ruby again encounters a system window that unexpectedly identifies her as a player and points to an other-dimensional energy emanating from her, hinting at the revelation of the secret of her origin. The message warns of a system administrator known for his cruelty and insists that the scenario be expedited. Otherwise, Ruby could be in danger due to interference from a higher power. The girl feels a sharp change in the atmosphere and realizes that the system knows more about her other world than it is letting on, which increases anxiety and suspicion. Klaus approaches her, and his favorability meter rapidly decreases with each interaction, which seems illogical and alarms Ruby. She tries to act discreetly, using her concealment skill, but still gets noticed, which raises doubts about the reliability of her abilities. Klaus insists on accompanying her, citing security regulations for members of the imperial family and Ruby is forced to agree, fearing a critical drop in the indicator. She remembers that having too little favor can lead to dangerous consequences, as has happened before with other characters. Along the way, Ruby decides to visit the Dark Guild, considering it a higher priority than further arguments with Klaus. The entrance to the guild turns out to be not a gloomy den, but an ordinary shop with an organized trading system and internal rules. She is offered the opportunity to purchase rare and often illegal artifacts, but is warned of the risks of using them. Ruby browses the selection, which includes mind-reading devices, magical books, power-up items, and artifacts with unusual effects. The prices turn out to be extremely high, and the usefulness of many things is questionable, which makes her skeptical. Despite this, she makes a large purchase and receives a Dark Guild membership card, giving her access to branches across the continent. Next, her attention is drawn to the system of exchanging old horns for rewards and the ranking of participants based on the number of trophies handed in. First place goes to Simon, who has exchanged over 100 horns, which means he can summon the starting monsters en masse. Ruby understands that such a number is impossible without hidden activity in the capital, about which nothing is officially known. This contradicts previous information about the calls and increases suspicions of someone's secret interference. Klaus continues to accompany her, and his stats suddenly change without apparent logic, leaving Ruby confused. She notices the similarities between the brothers, despite their contrasting personalities, and wonders about the hidden motives behind their behavior. Meanwhile, Ancelot sees Ruby return with Klaus and becomes gloomy as he watches from the sidelines as he shows her attention. On the eve of Ruby's return, Ansel sneaks into the Duke of Hamilton's chambers and uses a disguise potion, permanently transforming his luxurious hair into a smooth, bald head. The result is flawless and instantaneous. Inspired by his success, he decides to do the same with Prince Orin, perceiving what is happening as a harmless prank that could add chaos to the frozen scenario of palace life. The prince is not prone to cruel ridicule, but the thought that Ruby might genuinely laugh pushes him to risky stunts that go beyond the bounds of ordinary caution. As he walks through the palace, he catches himself with a strange sense of change, as if his own actions are no longer dictated by cold calculation, but by something much more personal. He wonders why he interferes with the course of events at all, when he could remain a bystander and allow the scenario to repeat itself without any extra effort. The answer comes naturally. He made Ruby a player for a reason, because without awakening, her path could have ended tragically early on in the story. Even if she doesn't change the outcome and the Light Dragon is defeated again according to the old scenario, Ansel does not regret his decision to break the established order. With these thoughts, he is in high spirits until he notices Ruby returning to the palace, accompanied by an unfamiliar man. The man turns out to be Klaus Winster, who introduces himself as the one tasked with escorting and guarding the princess, which immediately puts Ansel on guard. He moves closer, trying to hide his irritation, but the tension between him and Klaus becomes palpable, as if an invisible line of rivalry has stretched between them. Klaus openly declares that he does not intend to entrust the princess to an unknown person, to which Ansel emphasizes his origin and title, considering them sufficient guarantee. However, for Klaus, the noble name only increases suspicions, and the atmosphere quickly escalates, threatening to escalate into open conflict. Ruby knows that one more step and a fight will break out, so she quickly intervenes, grabbing Ansel's hand and thereby demonstrating her choice. She assures Klaus that Prince Ansel is a man who can be trusted and asks him to return, assuring him that no further protection is required. Klaus hesitates, but eventually backs down, though his gaze shows disappointment and an unspoken sense of defeat. Ruby notices that Klaus's expression reminds her of a moment in the past when a similar emotion unexpectedly led to an increase in his favor. Left with Ansel, she breathes a sigh of relief, glad that she managed to avoid an unnecessary collision and maintain her fragile balance. Ansel asks with a slight mockery since when she became so close to Klaus, reminding him of his negative level of affection. He subtly hints that Ruby is oblivious to the obvious feelings and hidden reactions of those around her, while he himself is closely monitoring the slightest changes. Meanwhile, Klaus remains behind, experiencing the bitterness of retreat, and a new, not yet fully realized connection is strengthened between Ruby and Ancelot. Ancelot asks Ruby with a slight smile if she trusts him now, reminding her of her earlier doubts. She avoids a direct answer, but deep down, she admits that since their first tense encounter, he has always been there in times of danger. She realizes that it was on his advice that she became a gambler and changed the course of her own destiny, meaning their connection goes far deeper than coincidence. However, this doesn't negate the need to demand an explanation for the scandal they caused. Ruby stops him and asks him point blank why he cut off the Duke of Hamilton's hair, because even if he had said something harsh, such an act seemed excessive and risky. Ancelot doesn't deny what he did and, with a sly grin, hints that the effect was impressive. He claims he only wanted to amuse her a little and shake up the stagnant order of palace intrigue. The girl is forced to admit that hearing about the Duke gave her a brief feeling of relief, but she is embarrassed when the prince closes the distance and carefully adjusts her collar, turning the conversation into a game of hints. He teases her, promising to inflict similar punishment on Prince Oren if it makes her change her mind. And Ruby indignantly states that she does not encourage harming people for fun. Ancelot answers ambiguously, hinting that the princess prefers to act differently, and his light laughter confuses her, because just a moment ago, he seemed serious and focused. Ruby notices how his mood changes dramatically. From a silent observer, he turns into a man who genuinely enjoys her reactions, as if her laughter is more important to him than any political calculations. She reminds him that even with his efforts, her feelings will not change, because her duty as a member of the imperial family stands above personal emotions and temporary impulses. Ancelot accepts her firmness without irritation and suddenly offers a different argument, producing a strange monster horn found in the Duke's chambers during his visit. Ruby is amazed by the find and realizes that such objects could not have ended up there by accident, since such horns are used to lure monsters to certain places. Rumors surface in her memory that after Oren's victory, monsters suddenly stopped appearing on the border, and his fame as the defender of the empire rapidly increased. She begins to put the facts together and comes to a frightening conclusion. The monsters did not disappear out of fear of the prince, but were deliberately attracted by the horns to create the illusion of a feat. If this is true, it means that the lives of border residents could have been put at risk in order to strengthen political positions and promote the candidacy of the heir to the throne. Ruby understands that there were no serious casualties in the initial stages of the attacks, indicating a carefully planned provocation rather than a spontaneous threat. The thought of the Duke and her brother possibly being connected to a larger power behind the scenes of the system makes her uneasy, as it could mean interfering with the very structure of the scenario. She realizes that she had previously been reluctant to interfere in political games, preferring to survive and observe. But now the future of the entire empire, which she sincerely loves, is at stake. If a man willing to manipulate monsters for glory becomes emperor, the country could find itself on the brink of disaster and moral decay. Ruby faces a difficult choice: tell her mother about the discovery and cause a storm at court, or act covertly to gather more evidence. Ancelot, observing her concentrated expression, asks with a slight smile if she is happy with his gift, unaware that this find has become the beginning of a much more dangerous game. Ruby, smiling softly, takes Ancelot's hands in hers and confirms that she is satisfied with the payment she has received, giving him exactly the reaction he was looking for. For him, her sincerity becomes a reward, more valuable than any gratitude. She realizes that the horn he obtained is not just a prank, but a truly valuable key to uncovering a conspiracy, capable of changing the balance of power at court. Now the game goes beyond personal feelings. A few days later, a scandal erupts in the throne room. Duke Hamilton and Prince Oren desperately try to justify themselves to the empress, claiming that they were victims of a setup. Empress Chris watches their pleas coldly and without sympathy, while Ruby stands aside with an unperturbed smile, knowing that the carefully prepared trap has already snapped shut. When the Duke arrived with an apology and a gift, Ruby had already swapped the contents of the box, inserting a summoning horn inside, so that the revelation would take place right before the ruler's eyes. At the crucial moment, the Duke's wig slipped off, adding to the confusion, and the horn found in the gift caused confusion and suspicion, which Ruby skillfully directed in the right direction. She innocently remarked that such horns could attract monsters and hinted at their possible connection to the recent events on the border, causing the empress to become wary. Chris immediately grasped the hidden meaning and ordered a search of the duke's chambers, where they discovered a cache of many such horns and traces of their use. Among the finds was an ancient horn associated with the lake incident, which helped connect the string of strange events of recent months. Imperial appraisers confirmed the nature of the artifacts, and within just half a day, the Duke and his entourage were under arrest, and the influence of his house rapidly collapsed. Ruby wonders if there is a larger force behind all of this, as the coincidences fit too neatly into the logic of systemic intervention. She doubts that Oren and the Duke are administrators themselves, but she is sure that someone was guiding them, pushing them to create an artificial threat for the sake of increasing their reputation. Cedric appears before her with a changed aura and a strange expression on his face, as if there was another entity hiding behind him. He directly reproaches Ruby for being overly interested in the system, hinting that her actions go beyond the role of an ordinary player and affect the very mechanism of the scenario. The mask falls, and he introduces himself as Cedric, the administrator of the Glorious Branch, admitting that it was he who handed over the horns to speed up the plot. According to him, the previous player was too slow in focusing on peaceful lanes, so he decided to artificially strengthen the opponent to force the system to move forward. Ruby is outraged that innocent lives were put at risk for the sake of smooth progress and rejects excuses that reduce the Empire's fate to a script. Cedric indifferently notes that even his intervention did not save the branch from being rejected, and calls the situation an unfortunate outcome, as if it were a failed game. After these words, he disappears, leaving Ruby with the understanding that the game is much deeper than she assumed, and the administrators are ready to sacrifice people for the sake of the stability of the structure. As soon as he disappears, the garden fills with guards and servants, and the tension thickens as Ruby realizes that her open challenge to the system will no longer go unanswered. The administrator gives a cold order to eliminate Ruby, and the enchanted people repeat the command in unison, moving towards her with weapons in their hands, like puppets deprived of their own will. She instinctively closes, expecting an impact, but a system warning flashes before her eyes, and a blinding flash tears through the space, changing the course of events. The automatic combat mode activates, an explosion is heard, and Ruby is transported to a safe point, feeling a sword appear out of nowhere in her palms. When the light dissipates, the fallen bodies of those who, just a moment ago, were going to kill her lie around, and the realization sets in that without the auto-combat mode, she would not have survived. The system displays the skill's remaining duration and long cooldown, making Ruby realize she only has a few minutes to make the final stand. Cedric is irritated by the interference and states that only the administrator has the right to decide who is disrupting the system's order by raising the fallen and returning them to battle. The guards, rebelling under his control, surround her again, repeating the order to eliminate her, and Ruby understands that she cannot overcome them by force as long as someone else's will is in effect. She then summons a rare artifact, the Cold Leader's sacred scripture, acquired on the black market, hoping to use its hidden property against the believers. The system explains that the people subordinate to the administrator have strong faith, and therefore weakening their conviction can destroy the control imposed on them. Ruby begins to read, her hair glowing pink as the faith of those around her gradually decreases with each use of the artifact. At first, the effect seems insignificant, but as the charges are automatically expended, the decline in faith accelerates, and a look of alarm appears on Cedric's face. The Empire isn't known for its fanatical devotion to the temple, which plays into Ruby's hands. The level of conviction quickly drops below the critical point. When all the scripture charges are exhausted, the administrator's control weakens, and the enchanted people fall powerlessly to the floor, regaining their own will. Cedric realizes that he is left defenseless, because the fighting skills of his human shell are insignificant compared to his intelligence and status. He tries to buy time and justify himself, but Ruby is no longer willing to listen to explanations about scenarios and branch adjustments. Despite hesitating before striking the human-shaped creature, she overcomes her doubts and delivers the decisive blow. Cedric's body disintegrates like a hologram, gradually disappearing and leaving behind only traces of blood as proof of the reality of the fight. Ruby is presented with a message about a level up and a new title, but her joy instantly turns to alarm when a system error is mentioned. An emergency adjustment begins, and a sharp pain pierces her body, as if the very structure of the world is trying to rid itself of the malfunction it has become. As her consciousness fades, Ansel picks her up and places a heart-shaped pendant around her neck, stabilizing her and bringing back a sense of security. Ansel gently wipes away her tears and assures her the pain will never return. His deep voice works almost like a spell. The tension subsides, and the agony racking her body gradually dissipates without a trace. Later, they stroll through the garden, and Ruby tries to understand what happened. The prince explains that the system destroys everything that disrupts the established order, especially those who become mistakes. She's surprised that he himself wasn't harmed, even after admitting he was a bug. Ansel admits he's long since gotten used to this kind of pain and has learned to endure the system's pressure in silence. He asks her to always wear the heart-shaped necklace he gave her, as it hides her presence from the system's observation and protects her from direct correction. As Ruby looks at the pop-up system window with her level and title, she feels a sense of unease. Her player status and the bug mark make her a target. Ansel reveals the secret of the decoration. Inside is half the heart of the light dragon of Helheim, an ancient creature equal in power to the deity of light. According to ancient legends, the dark deity was deceived and lost his divinity, being reborn as a dragon, whose power still influences the structure of the world. Half of the heart stores colossal energy, and at the same time serves as the only weapon capable of striking the dragon itself if connected with the second part. If both halves are brought together, one can gain power beyond current limitations, and perhaps even shake the very system and order of this world. The thought both terrifies and attracts Ruby. The prospect of breaking the player's shackles sounds tempting, but the price for such intervention is unknown. She realizes that she never wanted to become a player, and now she finds herself a system error, balancing between protection and destruction. Ancelot promises to protect her, but Ruby doubts his true purpose and asks if he is seeking to kill the dragon to bring down the system. He replies that he is driven by a personal desire, the death of the light dragon, and this confession sounds much deeper than just a fight against order. The origins of his desire are linked to a prophecy about a woman who was destined to gain the heart of a dragon and change the fate of the world. She did indeed receive half of the heart, but was unable to fully revive the dragon and died in its flames, becoming a self-sacrificing heroine. With her death, the world was plunged into darkness and sorrow, and the very structure of order was forced to restructure itself to maintain balance. Ancelot admits that he doesn't remember her face, but he remembers the pain of loss, as if a void had formed in his chest that could not be filled. The prophetic child of light became a victim of his own mission, and this event forever changed his attitude towards the dragon and the system itself. Ruby realizes that this isn't just a bug, but a creature that survived the destruction of the world and retained the desire to finish what it started at any cost. The realization that the dragon's heart has the power to either save her from the system or bring about a new catastrophe leaves her with a choice that will determine the fate of the entire order. That morning, in Ruby's bedroom, a system window declares that it detects her as a malicious file. She brushes it off in irritation, but notices that since its reappearance, the interface has been acting strangely and cautiously. The messenger justifies himself by saying that he is obliged to be near the player, but now he is keeping an especially close eye on her, trying to determine whether she has become a full-fledged bug. Ruby corrects him, insisting on her name and her intention to move the script forward. She openly declares that she won't stop, even if the system considers her a mistake. The messenger is indignant and refuses to help the bug advance the story. But Ruby coldly warns that she will find other ways to force the system to cooperate if necessary. She understands that only a bug can destroy the system window, and the messenger itself is vulnerable to its presence because it senses the instability emanating from the error. Even so, the memory of the window trying to protect her from the administrator makes Ruby soften. For the first time, someone was genuinely concerned about her. Messenger fearfully asks if she's going to harm him. Ruby admits she doesn't want to destroy him, even though she recognizes her own status as a mistake. Her true goal is to defeat the light dragon and thereby destroy the system itself, but out loud, she only speaks of her intention to complete the scenario. She suggests that a successful completion could restore her status as a regular player rather than a bug, and invites the messenger to decide for himself whether he will support her path. The system window, in a panic, transforms into a small bird, indignant at the impossibility of the bug becoming a player, and stubbornly refuses to give its name. Ruby guesses that before her is not just an interface, but an envoy of a great system, proud of his role and status, despite his tiny appearance. The bird, after some hesitation, still promises to help her get rid of her bug status and become a real player, which makes Ruby smile involuntarily. She asks for a new script, confirming her readiness to move forward and fight the light dragon, no matter how difficult the path may be. The main quest of the first chapter opens: obtain the hero's proof, because without allies, it is impossible to defeat the dragon watching over the world. To complete the mission, you must secure the support of at least one companion by completing one of 3 difficult conditions to choose from. Ruby recalls the original story and realizes that Klaus Winchester will be the key figure, although his level of sympathy for her is deep in the negative zone. The first option involves raising his standing to an incredible level, which seems almost unattainable given his coldness and constant decline in ratings. The second path also seems unrealistic, so the third remains the most feasible: to defeat him in a duel and force him to acknowledge her strength. Although Ruby doesn't like to solve problems by brute force, she decides to start with a peaceful way and see if it is possible to change his attitude without conflict. Meanwhile, Klaus is in the minister's garden, pondering the rumors of her intimacy with the southern prince, feeling a strange irritation when he suddenly hears her voice behind him and is forced to turn around. Before meeting Klaus, Ruby chooses the first option of the task, to raise his disposition to 500, although the starting value remains frighteningly low and does not give reason for optimism. With Sylvia's help, she heads to the Marcus estate, hoping that a change of scenery and pre-prepared appearance bonuses will help turn the tide. In the gazebo, she spots Klaus sitting alone. The system confirms the previous reading, -190, and this number already feels like a death sentence. Ruby activates all the charm-enhancing items left by Heisen, hoping that at least today the effect will be noticeable and shift the cold scale in her favor. As soon as she greets Klaus, the reading suddenly drops even lower, -200, then -210, and the numbers continue to rapidly decrease. The reading drops to -280, and Ruby is at a loss to understand what she did wrong, because her words were impeccably polite. The system warns that if the target falls below a certain threshold, hostility may develop, and even deeper, even killing intent. The realization that she is balancing on the edge of a dangerous point makes her shudder internally, although there is still some reserve left before the critical level. Ruby uncovers Klaus's detailed stats and learns of his illustrious past: a child prodigy who defeated a beast as a child and trained in the Holy Kingdom. His level is high, his beliefs are conservative, and his attitude toward romantic ideas is sharply negative. However, the data unexpectedly includes an ideal type: Ruby. The contradiction confuses her. If she suits his taste, why does every contact between them only reinforce the negative dynamic? Later at the palace, she shares what happened with Ansel, who, to her surprise, is already aware of Klaus's strange quirk. He explains that the person's base level of sympathy is extremely low, and that his main character trait is the suppression of his own feelings and the avoidance of affection. When confronted with a person who perfectly suits his preferences, Klaus instinctively increases his distance to prevent himself from falling in love. Thus, the drop in indicators is not hatred, but a defensive reaction, an attempt to control emotions through denial and internal prohibition. Ruby is amazed that feelings can be distorted by the system into absurd numbers that do not reflect the true depth of experiences. Ancelot admits that he did not tell her about Klaus's traits on purpose, because he was uncomfortable realizing that she was the minister's ideal. His reaction betrays hidden jealousy, especially when Ruby casually remarks on Klaus's attractiveness, which unwittingly offends the prince. She understands that the world of numbers and scales is much more complex than it seems, and that raising Klaus's favor using conventional methods is practically impossible. Ruby eventually realizes that if the soft approach is doomed to failure, she will have to reconsider her strategy and choose a different path to complete the hero's quest. Ruby heads to Marcus's estate, using silver to test her first option to increase Klaus's affection, despite his low affection level of -190, and realizes that conventional methods are unlikely to help. She uses all the remaining appearance enhancement items from Hayden to somehow change the impression, hoping that today the situation with Klaus will be different, despite his habit of sharply declining sympathy. When Ruby meets Klaus in the gazebo, she greets him in a friendly manner, but Klaus's reaction is unexpected. Her affection drops from -190 to -280, leaving her confused and worried. The system warns that if the sympathy drops too low, Klaus may develop hostility, even murderous intent, which increases Ruby's fear. But she understands that she must move the scenario forward. Piela, the translator bird, explains that -200 causes aggressive tendencies and -900 is life-threatening. So Ruby has to carefully calculate every step when interacting with Klaus. Ruby realizes a paradox. Klaus is her ideal type according to the system, but his baseline low likability triggers self-preservation reactions, and it is because of this that his feelings for her decline, creating an emotional trap. After returning to the palace, Ruby shares her observations about Klaus with Ancelot. The prince explains that her lack of attraction is not only to her but to all women, and that her perfection makes Klaus afraid of falling in love. Ruby painfully realizes that Klaus's sympathy is falling not because of her actions, but because of his internal conflict between ideal and fear, which makes the standard sympathy increase impossible. After some reflection, she comes to the conclusion that conventional methods won't work, and decides to try the second option, to force Klaus to take a knight's oath using a magical proposal ring from an underground guild. Ruby decides to use the ring, which normally boosts declarations of love by 500 points, as a symbol of her request for a knight's oath, believing that this act can bypass the system's limitations and provide a strategic advantage. When Klaus appears, Ruby boldly opens the box and directly asks him to become her knight, expecting the item's effect to work and hoping for a positive impact on his affection. Klaus's reaction is unexpectedly negative. His affection drops by 40 points, reaching -340, and Ruby realizes that direct action with him almost always backfires. She understands that she will have to use more drastic methods, including possible physical coercion or complete submission, to achieve her goal and prevent the scenario from getting stuck. Ancelot, already waiting by the carriage, suggests an alternative. Find the easiest way to win Klaus's favor, although at first he does not want to reveal the details, arguing that he is concerned about the princess. Ruby realizes that her new power as a princess and swordmaster allows her to act differently. She can now use influence, skills, and magical items in ways she couldn't before as a shy person. She realizes that the old Ruby, dependent on her mother's approval, is no longer the same. She can now independently move the narrative forward, control events, and influence the outcome of her meeting with Klaus. Ruby's internal monologue shows how she balances fear, strategy, and ambition. To move the narrative forward, she must make difficult decisions without relying solely on sympathy. Is peaceful again after the crimes of Duke Hamilton and Brother Orin are exposed, giving Ruby room to act and reinforcing her confidence that her role in the scenario is now critical. The princess prepares to speak with her brother to explain her actions, justify her strategy, and demonstrate that her goal is not simply to follow the prophecy, but to use power and influence to advance the scenario. Ruby is determined to become a hero, rally her allies, and prepare to complete the Prove Your Hero mission using her new abilities and strategic approach. Ruby explains to her mother that it is dangerous to go alone and asks to assign her a knight to accompany her, emphasizing that she wants to fight as an equal, showing beauty and determination to convince the empress to allow her to participate in the tournament and choose the best knight. The empress agrees and promises to support Ruby, offering help in any circumstances, which gives the girl confidence, and she, in turn, bows, assuring that if necessary, she will turn to her mother for advice and support. Ruby reflects on Klaus's knightly oath, realizing that it is impossible to force him without breaking the system, so she chooses a path that will allow him to voluntarily open his heart while preserving his honor and her own dignity. Due to Klaus's negative sympathy and his closed nature, Ruby realizes that the path to recognition is not easy. Direct coercion or the use of an imperial decree will not work, so a strategic and cunning plan is needed. She decides to use the third option, a duel to force submission, and realizes that for this she needs a compelling reason so that Klaus does not refuse and does not perceive her actions as an insult or a challenge. The princess's idea is to organize a tournament, since the title of the empire's greatest knight is vacant, and participating in it will not arouse suspicion. This way, she will be able to meet with Klaus and force him to acknowledge her power and right to obey. On the day of the tournament, the stands fill with people, and the final participants are Ruby and Klaus. Rumors of the princess's awakening sword talent spread, and Klaus initially underestimates her, mistaking her for a fragile girl, but soon changes his mind. He watches Ruby easily defeat the other participants and realizes that she is no ordinary princess, but a sword master capable of seriously challenging him. So he prepares for the final duel with full concentration. Before the match begins, the girl expresses a desire for a fair and respectful battle, and Klaus reciprocates with mutual respect, creating an atmosphere of knightly combat and demonstrating that both are ready to act according to the rules and honor. Just as the finale begins, the Orange Prince Orant suddenly appears on the stage, shouting at Ruby and threatening to kill her while holding a glowing purple sphere, causing fear and tension among the audience. The princess is shocked by his appearance, not understanding how he ended up at the tournament, because it was believed that he was sent to a monastery for life, and now his goal is to destroy everyone and put an end to the empire, which creates an immediate threat. Orant's power emits a purple aura that explodes around them, and the crowd cries out for caution, while Ruby stands her ground, keeping her composure and preparing for a possible attack. Klaus instantly shields Ruby from the powerful blast of energy and wind generated by Ward's power, displaying courage and an instinctive protectiveness that evokes a familiar feeling of affection and trust in Ruby. Ruby calls him by his usual nickname, Ancelot, and Klaus notices, although it makes him a little uncomfortable because his protective instincts are heightened, but his feelings for the princess remain hidden under the mask of knightly determination. Suddenly, a system message transports them to another space, like a parallel dimension, where the threat of Orant seems more tangible, and control of the situation requires maximum concentration and teamwork. Klaus asks if everything is all right while checking on Ruby, and she confirms that she is, but at the same time, she realizes that her main opponent now is not only Orant, but also the need to show skill and composure. Ruby notices that it is not Klaus in front of her, but another person, and apologizes, realizing the moment of confusion in space, which adds tension and demonstrates the difficulty of controlling the situation in the face of system intervention and magical effects. She realizes that every step she takes now matters, from the proper use of power and magical items to interacting with allies and enemies to maintain a strategic advantage and continue the scenario. Ruby senses Klaus's concern when he asks if everything is okay, and notices how his concern is evident in his eyes and gestures, despite the negative sympathy and the danger looming over them in this strange space where they are threatened by a mysterious force. They find themselves in Klaus's space, and Ruby wonders how his affection could drop to -470, realizing that if it drops another 10 points, there is a risk of violent feelings, and she must tread carefully to avoid making the situation worse. Klaus suddenly asks why she chose him for the knight's oath, with a hint of irritation, but with eyes full of hidden affection, and Ruby understands that it is impossible to explain the motives directly because it is connected with her quest and personal safety. She thinks that having Klaus, who is more virtuous and noble, as her shield would be helpful, but the decision to choose Klaus is due to the fact that he, as a character from the Chronicles of Light, can help in the task. Although she hides this from him, suddenly, the space around them begins to change, something like rain or comets flying through the air, and Klaus immediately puts up a shield, pulling Ruby towards him, explaining that this is the corrosion effect, protecting the dimension from invasion, which can be dangerous, but as long as they do not touch the liquid, there is no problem. Ruby is disturbed by Klaus's protectiveness towards her, noticing that his clothes are damaged and his skin is burned by the corrosive liquid. But he does not let go of her, demonstrating his determination to protect her even at the cost of his own pain. She pulls herself even closer to him, hugging him, knowing that every contact lowers his affection, and watches as his readings drop to -480, then to -490, and realizes the risk that if they drop below -500, violent feelings will appear. Ruby realizes she has no choice. If she lets Klaus go, he will be exposed to the corrosive liquid, so she decides to stay by his side despite his gradual decline in affection, accepting the responsibility of protecting him. She screams, not understanding why he is the only one getting burned, and he patiently explains that she needs to be protected, acting as her shield, and thus demonstrating selflessness and willingness to sacrifice himself for her safety. The girl realizes that in this life, he is ready to protect her, although she herself did not ask for this, and she understands that she wants to walk next to him and not hide behind his protection, wanting to be an equal partner and not just a protected princess. Klaus suddenly admits that Ruby doesn't want to be a lady to hide behind, but a true ruler, which makes him reconsider his actions and strengthen his resolve to support her despite the danger and his own suffering. Suddenly, he falls on top of her, shielding her from the corrosive rain that pours down, and Ruby fears for his body, but realizes that he continues to protect her even at the cost of his own pain, demonstrating true knightly self-sacrifice. She feels his body burn with the liquid, but he doesn't let go of her, and in that moment, Ruby understands the depth of his affection and determination, which strengthens her resolve to act as an equal and protect him in return. A flash of light suddenly appears and Klaus awakens, activating a large glowing shield that was only supposed to appear later in the original script, signifying the merging of fate and the proper use of their power together. When the rain stops, Ruby asks if he is okay, and Klaus replies that his wounds are healed, but at the same time shows concern for her well-being, confirming that her safety is more important to him than his own suffering. At that moment, Ancelot bursts through space, creating a hole, and appears next to him, causing Ruby to rejoice as she excitedly waves her hands at him, feeling relieved and supported by her ally at this critical moment. Ancelot grabs Ruby's hands and holds her close, tears showing in his eyes, and Ruby senses his genuine concern for her, confirming how deeply he cares for her safety and how much he values her presence. Ruby realizes that their alliance is now critical to their survival and the success of their mission, and that the combination of her strength, Klaus's, and Ancelot's support creates the necessary balance to overcome the dangers ahead. She understands that their every move and action requires maximum coordination, and that her strategy is not simply about the power of the sword, but about trust, mutual protection, and using the capabilities of allies at critical moments, which makes her a true leader. Inside, Ruby feels her own resolve grow. She is no longer just a princess, but a player, a strategist, and a master swordsman, capable of making decisions, protecting allies, and shaping events, influencing the outcome of history and her own future.